I am Maya, 34 years old, and a venture capitalist who operates entirely from the shadows. At a family cookout, my husband's family humiliated me in front of our 3-year-old son, and the man who vowed to protect me took their side. Either apologize to my mother, he demanded, or pack your things and get out of my life. Fine. I will go, I replied. Then I picked up my son, got into the Porsche Panamera, and drove away. My mother-in-law ran after me screaming, "Leave the car." She still thought the Porsche and the very lifestyle she was bragging about belonged to her son. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic in-laws who underestimated your worth. The July heat in Atlanta was thick and unforgiving, but it was absolutely nothing compared to the suffocating tension in my mother-in-law's sprawling backyard. It was the annual family cookout, an event Brenda treated more like a royal court gathering than a casual Sunday barbecue. Old-school rhythm and blues music played softly from the expensive outdoor speakers, mingling with the heavy sizzle of the grill. I had spent the last 3 hours standing over the hot coals, marinating and grilling the ribs, keeping my head down and doing the heavy domestic lifting, while the rest of the family relaxed under the shaded patio, sipping their craft cocktails and laughing. Then came Chloe. Chloe was married to my husband's older brother, David. She was a white woman who wore her marriage into a successful, prominent black family, like a badge of progressive superiority. She loved playing the white savior, constantly offering me unsolicited advice on everything from my natural hair to my career, cloaking her deep-seated condescension in a sugary, polite tone. She strutted over to the grill in a custom silk sundress that easily cost over $1,000, holding a crystal glass of sparkling water. She leaned over and peered down at the platter of ribs I had just finished plating. "Oh, Maya," she sighed, her voice intentionally, loud enough to cut through the music and draw everyone's attention. "Did you use a cheap store-bought rub for these? It just smells so heavily seasoned and, well, so basic. I suppose we cannot expect you to understand refined culinary tastes considering the rough neighborhoods you grew up in." But really, David and Marcus were raised on a much higher standard. You can take the girl out of the struggle, but you just cannot teach her class. "I was hoping to eat something healthy today, but I guess I will just order a salad." Loud mocking laughter erupted from the patio table. I turned my head and saw my mother-in-law Brenda chuckling openly into her wine glass. My husband Marcus was standing right next to her, grinning at Chloe's vicious insult like it was the funniest joke he had heard all day. For years I had swallowed their relentless microaggressions. I had let them talk down to me, pretending my success in the financial world was just a fluke, while Marcus paraded around as the golden boy tech entrepreneur. They genuinely thought I was just an uneducated working-class girl who got incredibly lucky by marrying into their prestigious family. I looked at Chloe's smug, smiling face, then down at the heavy glass pitcher of ice-cold, freshly squeezed lemonade resting on the prep table next to the grill. I did not yell. I did not argue. I did not launch into a defensive speech about my worth. I simply picked up the heavy pitcher and, with a swift, deliberate flick of my wrist, sent a tidal wave of sticky yellow liquid splashing directly across Chloe's chest. The freezing lemonade soaked her custom silk dress, instantly clinging tightly to her skin and dripping in messy puddles down her expensive designer sandals. Chloe shrieked a high-pitched, horrifying sound of absolute shock that abruptly stopped the music and halted every conversation in the yard. "What is wrong with you?" Chloe gasped frantically, wiping at the ruined, stained silk while backing away. "Are you crazy?" Brenda slammed her hands down on the patio table so hard her wine glass toppled over and shattered against the concrete. "You ungrateful ghetto trash!" Brenda screamed, marching aggressively toward the grill, her face twisted in rage. "How dare you attack your sister-in-law like a savage? She is a guest in this family. You have always been nothing but a low-class burden to my son. You do not belong with us." I wiped my hands slowly on a towel, my heart beating steadily. I looked toward Marcus, fully expecting my husband to finally step in to draw a line and defend his wife against this verbal assault. Instead, he stormed over with his jaw clenched in absolute fury. But his anger was not directed at his mother or his disrespectful sister-in-law. Our 3-year-old son Leo was sitting quietly on a small patio chair nearby, happily eating from a paper plate of macaroni and cheese, completely innocent to the adult drama unfolding. Marcus walked right past me, leaned down, and snatched the plate directly out of little Leo's hands, throwing it violently into the nearest trash can. Deprived of his food and startled by the sudden aggression, Leo immediately burst into confused, terrified tears. Marcus marched back to me, pointing a rigid finger mere inches from my face, completely ignoring his crying child. "Do not you ever disrespect my family again," he snarled, his voice laced with absolute contempt and authority. "You are constantly embarrassing me. You will apologize to my mother and Chloe right now. Either you apologize and beg for their forgiveness, or you pack your things and get out of my life today." I looked at the man I had married, the man whose failing startup company was secretly drowning in massive debt, surviving only because it was being quietly funded by my private equity firm through a shell corporation. He thought he held all the power. He thought I was trapped. I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice to match his. I simply took off my cooking apron and let it drop onto the grass. "Fine," I said, keeping my voice dangerously calm and steady. "I will go." I walked over to my crying son, scooped Leo up into my arms, and whispered softly into his ear that everything was going to be all right. Without looking back at the stunned faces of my in-laws, I reached into my designer purse, pulled out the keys to the matte black Porsche Panamera sitting in the driveway, and headed straight for the front gate. Brenda suddenly realized what I was doing. Panic replaced her anger. She sprinted across the grass, her expensive heels sinking into the dirt, screaming at the top of her lungs. "Leave the car. Leave the car right now. That is my son's hard-earned money. You are not stealing his vehicle, you gold digger." I securely strapped Leo into his car seat, slid behind the leather steering wheel, and smirked at Brenda's frantic reflection in the rearview mirror. I pressed the ignition, letting the powerful engine roar to life, and hit the gas. I drove out of the estate, leaving my screaming mother-in-law coughing in a thick cloud of exhaust smoke, completely unaware of the financial storm that was about to destroy their entire world tomorrow morning. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the master bedroom, casting a warm glow over Marcus. He stretched his arms across the expansive California king bed, a smug and satisfied grin stretching across his handsome face. He checked his designer watch. It was 9 in the morning. He fully expected to look at his phone and see at least 20 missed calls and a dozen desperate text messages from Maya begging for his forgiveness. That was how it always worked in their dynamic. He would assert his dominance, put her in her proper place in front of his family, and she would eventually crawl back eager to maintain the pristine image of their black excellence marriage. He reached for his phone on the mahogany nightstand, already rehearsing the condescending speech he would deliver about respecting his mother Brenda and acknowledging her place in the family hierarchy. But the screen was completely clear of any notifications from his wife. Before his irritation could fully register, the phone vibrated violently in his hand. The caller ID displayed a private number. Marcus swiped to answer, clearing his throat to project his usual commanding boardroom tone. He expected it to be a venture capital scout or a journalist wanting an interview about his highly publicized tech startup. Instead, a deep and gravelly voice cut straight through the line with absolutely zero pleasantries. "Marcus, this is Sterling." The name hit Marcus like a bucket of freezing ice water. Sterling was not just any lawyer in Atlanta. He was a ruthless, high-powered attorney, known for dismantling corporate empires and destroying reputations before lunchtime within the city elite circles. "What can I do for you, Sterling?" Marcus asked, sitting up straight, suddenly hyper-aware of the deafening silence in the massive house. "I am not calling to ask for a favor, Marcus. I am calling as official legal counsel for M Holdings LLC to inform you that your financial access has been terminated effective immediately. The Centurion American Express card, the corporate platinum accounts, and the business line of credit you have been operating under are now completely frozen. Any attempt to use them will be flagged as unauthorized fraudulent activity. Have a highly productive Monday." The line went dead before Marcus could even process the words. Marcus stared at the blank screen, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He threw the heavy duvet off, dressed in record time, and practically sprinted out the front door. He had to order a premium rideshare service, realizing with a sudden and terrifying clarity that the matte black Porsche Panamera was actually gone. 40 minutes later, he bypassed the security desk at the downtown high-rise building where Maya housed her venture capital firm. I ignored the receptionist calling out his name and marched straight toward the heavy glass doors of the executive suite. He kicked the door open with enough force to make the glass rattle violently in its metal frame. Maya sat behind her massive oak desk, dressed in an immaculate emerald green pantsuit, her natural hair styled in a flawless silk press. She did not even flinch at the loud noise. She simply looked up from her financial reports, her expression as calm and unbothered as a still lake. "Are you completely out of your mind?" Marcus roared, slamming both of his hands flat onto her pristine desk, leaning over to intimidate her. "You think you can call some shark lawyer to freeze my personal accounts? You think you can take my son, humiliate me in front of my mother and my brother's wife, and then dare to cut off my money? I will absolutely destroy you, Maya. I will drag your name through the mud in family court. I will tell the judge you are emotionally unstable, that you are a danger to Leo. I will take full custody of my son, and I will make sure you pay me massive alimony for the rest of your miserable, pathetic life." Maya leaned back in her ergonomic leather chair, slowly intertwining her fingers. She let his empty, aggressive threats echo and die in the spacious office before she made a single physical move. Without saying a word, she opened her top drawer, pulled out a thick, legal-sized manila folder, and tossed it carelessly across the desk. It landed heavily, sliding onto the polished wood right in front of him. "Read it," she commanded, her voice dangerously quiet and laced with absolute authority. Marcus snatched the folder, his hands shaking with a volatile mixture of blind rage and sudden adrenaline. He ripped it open, his eyes darting frantically across the dense legal jargon and official banking statements. His face, previously flushed with aggressive anger, rapidly drained of all color. "The Porsche Panamera, you love parading around town to impress your country club friends. It is registered entirely to M Holdings LLC. The Centurion card you used to buy those expensive golf clubs and pay for Chloe's lavish designer dinners so she could feel like a white savior. The primary account holder is M Holdings LLC, and the initial seed money you so proudly announced you secured to launch your tech startup 3 years ago." Maya paused, letting a cold, mocking smile touch her lips. "Check the routing numbers, Marcus. Every single dime came from a subsidiary grant controlled by M Holdings, and I own 100% of M Holdings. You are not a self-made tech billionaire. You are a glorified freeloader operating on an allowance I provided to keep your fragile male ego intact. You do not own the luxury cars. You do not own the unlimited credit lines. You do not even own the majority equity in your own failing tech startup. You have been playing a wealthy, successful black businessman, using my wallet. And as of this morning, your generous allowance has been permanently revoked." Marcus stared at the undeniable papers, his mind desperately trying to reject the crushing financial reality coming down on him. The flawless facade of his entire existence, his elevated status in the community, his arrogant dominance over his wife was built on paper-thin lies funded by the very woman his family had mercilessly mocked just 24 hours earlier. He gripped the edges of the legal documents, his knuckles turning white, and violently tore the thick stack of papers directly in half, throwing the shredded pieces into the air like confetti. "You think this means anything?" He spat, trying to salvage his shattered pride with a cruel, desperate sneer. "You think some plastic credit cards and a fancy car can actually stop me? I am Marcus Miller. The community respects me. The investors know my name. And more importantly, the legacy mansion is in my family's name. That estate belongs to me and my bloodline. My mother will change the heavy locks today. She will kick you and your ghetto attitude right to the curb where you belong. We do not need your dirty venture capital money. I still hold the actual keys to the castle, Maya." Maya slowly stood up from her chair, her posture radiating absolute terrifying power. She reached for her smartphone resting on the desk, tapped the screen once, and looked Marcus dead in the eyes with a confident smile that could instantly freeze boiling water. You should really call your mother Marcus, she said, her voice dripping with venomous, victorious satisfaction. Because right now she is screaming and crying outside the iron front gates of that precious castle, and the police are actively refusing to let her back inside. Marcus scrambled out of the high-rise building, his expensive leather shoes slipping against the polished marble floor. He flagged down a cab, violently shoving a $100 bill at the driver and barking his home address. The ride to the affluent Buckhead neighborhood felt like an eternity. His mind raced desperately, trying to construct a lie that could explain away the massive financial crater he had just fallen into. When the cab finally screeched to a halt in front of the sprawling brick estate that had been in the Miller family for 3 generations, Marcus felt the last remnants of his pride evaporate into the humid Georgia air. The scene on the pristine front lawn was absolute chaos. 2 Fulton County Sheriff vehicles were parked haphazardly on the manicured grass, their blue lights flashing brightly for the entire wealthy neighborhood to see. Standing on the sidewalk, completely locked out of the iron gates, was his mother, Brenda. Her usually flawless hair was disheveled, and her face was stained with running mascara. She was screaming wildly at a stoic deputy. Standing slightly behind her, looking utterly mortified but equally enraged, was his sister-in-law Chloe, clutching her beige Kelly bag like a physical shield against the humiliation. Marcus practically fell out of the cab. "Mom, what is going on?" he yelled, rushing toward the iron gates. Brenda grabbed his arm, her acrylic nails digging painfully into his skin. "Marcus, thank God you are here. Tell these ignorant officers who we are." Chloe and I were sitting on the back patio enjoying our afternoon tea and finalizing the guest list for the country club charity gala when these men barged through our front doors. They gave us 10 minutes to gather our essentials and forced us out of our own home. Tell them this is the Miller estate. Tell them they are making a massive, career-ending mistake. The lead deputy stepped forward holding a thick clipboard. He did not look intimidated in the slightest. "There is no mistake, Mr. Miller. This property was officially foreclosed on due to 90 days of unpaid mortgage defaults. The debt was recently purchased by a private equity firm, and the new legal owners filed for an expedited eviction. The judge signed the writ this morning. This house no longer belongs to your family. You are currently trespassing." Brenda let out a shrill, breathless gasp. "Mortgage defaults. Marcus, what is this man talking about? We own this house outright. Your grandfather paid off this property 20 years ago. What mortgage?" Marcus felt his throat close up. The crushing weight of his own financial incompetence finally pinned him to the ground. He could not look his mother in the eye. He stared down at the concrete sidewalk, the truth tumbling out of his mouth in a pathetic, defeated whisper. "I needed capital, Mom. The tech startup was bleeding cash. The investors were threatening to pull out. I secretly took out a massive loan against the house equity 2 years ago to cover payroll and development costs. I thought I could pay it back before anyone noticed. But the loan was sold to a venture capital fund." Brenda stumbled backward, her hand flying to her chest as if she had been physically shot. "You mortgaged the legacy home. You risked our generational wealth for your company." For a fraction of a second, Marcus braced himself for the slap he absolutely deserved. He expected his mother to disown him right there on the sidewalk. But the toxic, twisted loyalty of the Miller family dynamics kicked in almost instantly. Brenda did not slap him. Her expression morphed from shock to a twisted, venomous realization. She connected the dots regarding who exactly owned that venture capital fund. "This is Maya!" Brenda shrieked, her voice echoing down the wealthy street. "That calculating, poisonous snake. She orchestrated this entire thing. She deliberately bought the debt just to steal our home. She is trying to ruin us because she is jealous of our status. I knew we should never have let a low-class, opportunistic girl into this family. She is using her dirty money to control my son." Chloe immediately seized the opportunity to weaponize her position. She stepped forward, her pale face flushed with arrogant, unearned confidence. Her white savior complex flared up as she quickly aligned herself with Brenda, completely ignoring Marcus and his financial crimes. She pulled her phone from her designer bag, waving it aggressively at the deputies. "This is an illegal eviction," Chloe demanded, her voice dripping with extreme entitlement. "You cannot just throw prominent citizens onto the street without proper legal notice." My father is a senior partner at one of the most elite law firms in this state. I am calling him right now. We are going to sue Maya for every single penny she has. We will sue her for emotional distress fraud and illegal property seizure. She thinks she can use some loophole to steal a historical home from a black family just because she has a little bit of new money. I will make sure she is tied up in litigation for the rest of her miserable life. She messed with the wrong family today. As Chloe aggressively dialed her phone, a sleek custom black town car glided smoothly to a stop right behind the police cruisers. The driver quickly stepped out and opened the rear passenger door. Maya stepped onto the pavement. She looked immaculate, wearing a tailored white suit that radiated absolute power and control. She did not look like a grieving wife or a distressed mother. She looked like a conqueror, assessing her newly acquired territory. The deputies immediately nodded to her, recognizing her as the lawful property owner they had been briefed about. Brenda let out a feral scream and tried to lunge at her, but the deputies swiftly blocked her path, warning her to step back. Chloe glared at Maya, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at her face. "You are going to jail for this, Maya!" Chloe shouted, her voice shrill and full of arrogant venom. "My family lawyers are going to tear your little shell companies apart. You cannot just manipulate the law to steal a house. You are nothing but a bitter, vindictive woman, and I will personally see to it that you lose everything." Maya did not flinch. She did not raise her voice. She walked with deliberate, predatory grace until she was standing just inches away from the iron gates, looking directly at Chloe through the metal bars. She calmly reached into her designer handbag, pulled out a neatly folded bank statement, and threw it forcefully through the bars. The paper hit Chloe squarely in the chest before fluttering to the sidewalk. "Sister-in-law," Maya said, her voice smooth, icy, and echoing with absolute dominance. "Before you talk about the law, do you know whose money bought that Hermes bag you are holding?" Chloe stared down at the crisp bank statement resting near her designer sandals. Her manicured hands trembled slightly as she bent to retrieve the document. She unfolded the paper, her eyes scanning the highlighted lines of financial transfers. The black ink detailed massive wire transfers. They originated from Tech Solutions, Marcus's supposedly booming startup, going directly into a private checking account owned by her husband David. The amounts were staggering. 10,000 here, 20,000 there. Every single transaction aligned perfectly with Chloe's lavish lifestyle choices: the custom kitchen remodel, the luxury winter vacations to Aspen, and most recently the exact purchase price of the beige Hermes Kelly bag currently hanging from her arm. Chloe's face drained of all color, transforming her usually arrogant expression into a mask of pure horror. She looked up from the paper, her breath catching in her throat. Maya stood behind the iron gates, looking like an untouchable queen. She adjusted the cuffs of her white blazer. "Your husband has not worked a legitimate job in 4 years, Chloe. Did you really think his vague consulting firm was bringing in $500,000 a year? David has been secretly siphoning funds from his little brother's company to keep you draped in designer labels. He was absolutely terrified that if you realized he was broke, you would drop your progressive, elite white savior act and run back to your wealthy father's country club. And since Marcus's company was entirely funded by my venture capital firm, that means every single luxury you have enjoyed for the last 4 years was paid for by me." Brenda let out a breathless gasp, whipping her head around to stare at Chloe. The matriarch of the Miller family looked like her reality was actively fragmenting into pieces. "David is embezzling from his own brother," Brenda demanded, her voice shrill and panicked. Right on cue. A silver Mercedes-Benz swung around the corner and pulled up to the curb behind the police cruisers. David stepped out of the driver's seat, looking bewildered by the flashing blue lights and the sight of his mother and wife standing on the sidewalk with their luggage. He wore a crisp linen suit, looking every bit the successful businessman he pretended to be. "What is going on here?" David asked, jogging over to the group. "Why are the police at the house?" Chloe turned to face her husband. The bank statement crumpled in her fist. Her chest heaved with a volatile mixture of profound humiliation and explosive rage. The delicate superior facade she maintained around her black in-laws completely disintegrated. "You lied to me," she hissed, her voice vibrating with intense fury. "You told me you were closing international deals. You told me my trust fund could remain untouched because you were building your own empire. You have been stealing from Marcus. David froze. His eyes darted from his enraged wife to his mother, and finally to Maya, who offered him a chilling, knowing smile from behind the gates. Chloe, sweetheart, let me explain, David stammered, raising his hands in a defensive gesture. It was just a temporary cash flow arrangement. The business was going to pay it back. A temporary arrangement! Chloe screamed, her voice losing all its refined upper-class polish. You made me look like an absolute fool. I have been defending your family, lecturing people on your success, and playing the supportive progressive wife. Meanwhile, you are a pathetic unemployed fraud stealing from a woman you all treat like garbage. I am wearing clothes bought with her money. Before David could utter another miserable excuse, Chloe swung her arm back and delivered a vicious slap directly across his face. The sharp crack of her palm striking his cheek echoed down the quiet suburban street. David stumbled backward, clutching his face in shock. Brenda shrieked, rushing forward to protect her eldest son. Do not you dare put your hands on my child, Brenda yelled, pushing Chloe away. You entitled spoiled brat. You are the one who demanded the expensive vacations and the imported cars. You drove him to this. Do not touch me. Chloe shrieked back, swatting Brenda's hands away. I am calling my father. I am filing for divorce today. You people are criminals. You are all completely broke and disgusting. The Miller family structure imploded on the sidewalk. Brenda was yelling at Chloe, defending the son who had just been exposed as a thief. David was desperately trying to calm his hysterical wife while shielding himself from his mother's frantic movements. They were tearing each other to pieces, stripping away every ounce of dignity and respectability they claimed to hold so dear. Maya watched the absolute carnage with cold satisfaction. This was the reality of the people who had looked down on her for years. When stripped of the money she had secretly provided, they were nothing but a chaotic, desperate mess. Marcus stood frozen on the grass, watching his brother get slapped and his mother scream like a madwoman. His tech company was gone. His house was gone. His secret embezzlement was exposed. His family's reputation was currently bleeding out on the pavement. He looked through the iron bars at Maya. She had orchestrated this exact moment of maximum destruction. She had not just beaten him, she had systematically annihilated his entire world. Panic seized his mind. He was losing control of the narrative, and a narcissist without control is a highly dangerous creature. If he could not win with money or status, he would use the only weapon he had left. He would destroy her as a mother. Marcus slowly backed away from the screaming match on the sidewalk. He pulled his smartphone from his pocket, his fingers shaking as he dialed a sequence of numbers. He forced his breathing to quicken, intentionally pushing panic and tears into his voice. He walked toward the deputies who were watching the family altercation with sheer disbelief. I need to report an emergency, Marcus said loudly into his phone, making sure the deputies heard him. Yes, this is Marcus Miller. I need the police and child protective services immediately. My wife Maya Miller is suffering from a severe psychotic break. She has locked herself inside the property. She is highly unstable, violent, and she has kidnapped my 3-year-old son. I fear for his life. Please, you have to help me. She is holding my child hostage. Maya narrowed her eyes, hearing the sickening lie fall from his lips. Marcus snapped his phone shut and pointed an accusing finger at her. You think you can take my pride? I will take your son. I will have you committed to a psychiatric ward before the sun goes down. The faint, piercing wail of approaching police sirens began to echo in the distance, growing louder by the second. The flashing red and blue lights painted the affluent Buckhead Street in violent, erratic strokes. 3 Atlanta police cruisers and a muted gray sedan screeched to a halt right behind Maya's town car. Doors flew open. Officers stepped out quickly, hands resting cautiously on their duty belts, scanning the chaotic scene. A woman with a severe expression and a badge dangling from a lanyard stepped out of the gray sedan. Child Protective Services had arrived. Marcus immediately launched into his performance. His entire demeanor shifted from malicious rage to manufactured desperation. He rushed toward the officers, throwing his hands up in a gesture of helpless surrender, tears welling perfectly in his eyes. Officers, thank God you are here, Marcus cried out, his voice shaking with practiced vulnerability. That woman behind the gates is my wife Maya. She has completely lost her mind. She orchestrated a fraudulent eviction to throw my elderly mother on the street, and now she is holding my 3-year-old son hostage. She is erratic, violent, and I am terrified she might hurt him just to punish me. Brenda, never one to miss an opportunity for dramatics, clutched her chest and wailed in agreement. She is unhinged. She has been threatening us all day. Please save my grandson. The lead officer signaled for his team to spread out, approaching the heavy iron gates. Ma'am, he called out sternly to Maya. Step away from the gate and open it immediately. We have a report of a child in danger. We need to secure the boy and evaluate your mental state. Maya remained entirely unfazed by the flashing lights and accusatory shouts. She signaled to her private driver, who gently lifted a sleeping Leo from the back seat of the town car, keeping him completely shielded from the noise. Maya pressed the security code on the keypad, and the heavy iron gates slowly swung open. She stepped forward, her white suit pristine, her posture radiating an absolute chilling calm that immediately contrasted with Marcus's frantic narrative. Marcus saw his opening and leaned in closer to the CPS worker. "Look at her," he whispered loudly. "She is completely detached from reality. She uses her venture capital money to control me, to emasculate me. And now that I finally stood up for my family," she snapped, "you know how it is. She has that aggressive, uncontrollable temper. She needs a psychiatric hold before she damages my son permanently." The CPS worker stepped toward Maya holding a clipboard. "Mrs. Miller, we are going to need you to hand the child over to his father right now. We have credible reports of a psychotic break, and until we can verify your mental stability, the boy needs to be removed from your custody for his own safety." Maya did not raise her voice. She did not display a single ounce of the aggressive, erratic behavior her husband had just passionately described. Instead, she offered the CPS worker a polite professional smile and reached into her designer handbag. "I completely understand you are just doing your job," Maya said, her voice smooth and steady. "However, before you attempt to remove my son from the only stable parent he has ever known, I highly suggest you review the actual evidence of who the violent threat in this family truly is." She pulled out a sleek tablet, tapped the screen, and handed it directly to the CPS worker and the lead police officer. "I own this property," Maya explained calmly, "which means I also control the integrated security system and the hidden nanny cameras installed in every single room of this estate." The officers looked down at the high-definition video playing on the screen. The footage was crystal clear. It showed the interior of the mansion just a few weeks prior. On the screen, Marcus was pacing like a caged animal, screaming obscenities at Maya. The audio picked up his exact words as he violently swept a heavy crystal vase off the console table, sending it shattering across the marble floor, mere feet away from where little Leo was sitting and playing with his blocks. On the video, Leo began to cry hysterically. Marcus ignored his son entirely, continuing to verbally abuse his wife while Maya calmly shielded the boy from the broken glass. The CPS worker's eyes widened. Maya simply swiped to the next video, showing the exact same pattern of aggressive, destructive behavior from Marcus. "If you need further proof of who actually parents this child," Maya continued, handing a thick, meticulously organized binder to the social worker. "Here are 3 years of comprehensive medical, dental, and educational records for Leo. You will notice my signature on every single document. I am the one who takes him to the pediatrician. I am the one who attends his early learning seminars. His father does not even know the name of Leo's doctor, let alone his allergy restrictions." The lead officer handed the tablet back to Maya, his expression hardening as he turned his imposing gaze directly onto Marcus. The manufactured tears on Marcus's face instantly dried up. The officers closed the distance between them and the disgraced tech founder. "Mr. Miller," the officer said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, authoritative rumble, "filing a false police report and weaponizing Child Protective Services to settle a domestic dispute is a felony in the state of Georgia. You just wasted city resources and lied to federal agents. If you make one more sound, I will personally place you in handcuffs for filing a fraudulent emergency claim." Brenda gasped, taking a sudden step away from her son as the police glared at them. Marcus was completely cornered. His grand illusion had been shattered, His embezzlement exposed his family humiliated, and now his final desperate attempt to steal his son had spectacularly backfired. The sheer weight of his absolute defeat fractured his remaining sanity. His face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. He lunged forward, ignoring the police officer's warning, pointing a shaking finger at Maya. "You think you won?" Marcus roared, spit flying from his lips as he completely lost control. "You think a few security cameras and some bank statements give you the right to destroy my life? You are nothing. My tech startup is about to close a Series B funding round. Apex Investment Fund is wiring me $10 million this Friday. I am going to be richer than you could ever dream. I will hire the most ruthless lawyers in the country. I will crush your little shell companies. I will buy every judge in this city, and I will wipe your name off the face of the earth." Maya stood perfectly still, letting his pathetic, desperate threats hang in the humid air. A slow, chilling smile spread across her face, sharp enough to cut diamond. She tilted her head slightly, her voice dropping to a deadly quiet register that made the hair on the back of Marcus's neck stand up. "Did you just say the Apex Investment Fund, Marcus?" The sheer horror contorting Marcus's face was a masterpiece. When the name of the Apex Investment Fund dropped from my lips, the fabricated bravado drained entirely from his body. He stumbled backward on the manicured lawn, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He knew instantly that his final $10 million lifeline was not a miraculous venture capital rescue. It was my trap. Without uttering another word to the police or the Child Protective Services worker, Marcus turned and sprinted toward his rental car. He scrambled inside, slammed the door, and peeled out of the neighborhood, tires screeching against the asphalt. I was running out of time, and he knew it. As my private driver smoothly navigated the Atlanta traffic behind him, I knew exactly where my desperate husband was heading. He was not going to his lawyer. He was going to Midtown to secure the only tangible assets he had left. For the past year, Marcus had been siphoning funds from the company to play sugar daddy to a 22-year-old fitness model named Alicia. He had leased her a penthouse apartment and filled it with Cartier watches, diamond tennis bracelets, and limited edition Birkin bags. He intended to sweep through that apartment, snatch up those luxury goods, and pawn them to fund his legal defense. What Marcus failed to realize was that I had been tracking his financial infidelity for 10 months. I arrived at the luxury high-rise 15 minutes before he did, bypassing the concierge with a generous tip and heading straight for the penthouse. When Marcus finally burst through the heavy mahogany door of the apartment chest, heaving and sweat pouring down his face, he froze dead in his tracks. He had rushed in holding an empty duffel bag ready to ransack the place. Instead, he found me sitting comfortably on Alicia's curved velvet sofa, elegantly crossing my legs and taking a slow, deliberate sip from a porcelain espresso cup. Alicia stood next to the kitchen island, her arms crossed tight over her chest, staring at Marcus with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. Marcus choked out, dropping the duffel bag to the hardwood floor. "What are you doing here? How did you get in here?" "Alicia invited me in," I said, setting the espresso cup down on the glass coffee table. "We have been having the most enlightening conversation about your fake tech empire." Marcus immediately shifted into his default mode of aggressive manipulation. He stepped toward Alicia, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "Baby, listen to me. This woman is crazy. She is my obsessed ex-business partner. She is trying to ruin my life because I refused to sell her my company. Do not listen to a single lie she tells you." Alicia did not soften. She picked up a thick stack of financial ledgers from the kitchen counter and threw them violently at his chest. The heavy papers slapped against his shirt and fluttered to the floor. "You told me you were a single tech billionaire," Alicia shouted, her voice shaking with rage. "You told me you were building an empire. This woman just showed me your actual bank statements, Marcus. You are married, you have a 3-year-old son, and you do not even own the company you brag about. You are millions of dollars in debt. Every single dinner, every vacation, every piece of jewelry you bought me was funded by your wife's venture capital firm. You are a broke, lying parasite." Marcus panicked. He abandoned the lie and pivoted straight to greed. He lunged toward the bedroom door, his eyes darting frantically toward the custom vanity where the jewelry boxes were kept. "Fine," Marcus yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. "Believe whatever you want. But those diamonds and those bags belong to my company. I bought them and I'm taking them back right now. I raised a single finger, stopping him dead in his tracks. Actually, Marcus, you cannot take a single item from this apartment. He spun around, glaring at me. Watch me, he snarled. I pulled a notarized legal document from my briefcase. You bought those items using a corporate account registered to M Holdings LLC. Since I am the sole owner of that corporation, those items are legally my company's assets. However, I felt terrible that Alicia was dragged into your pathetic web of lies. So an hour ago, I had my legal team draft a deed of gift. I officially transferred full ownership of every single luxury item in this apartment to Alicia. They are classified as a corporate severance bonus. If you touch one bag or one watch, she has the absolute legal right to have you arrested for grand larceny. Marcus looked at the document, then at Alicia, who was already holding a large Louis Vuitton travel bag stuffed to the brim with velvet jewelry boxes. His face crumpled as the reality of his absolute poverty crashed down on him. He had no house, no company, no credit cards, and now no hidden assets to pawn. Alicia grabbed her iced coffee off the counter. She marched right up to Marcus, who was too stunned to move. You make me sick, she whispered. With a sharp flick of her wrist, she threw the entire cup of iced coffee directly into his face. The dark brown liquid splashed across his eyes, soaking into his expensive dress shirt and dripping pathetically down his chin. Alicia stepped over the ruined financial documents, walked out the front door with her designer bags, and slammed it shut behind her. Marcus slowly wiped the coffee from his eyes. His breathing was ragged. The arrogant, abusive man who had ordered me to apologize to his racist sister-in-law at a cookout was completely gone. He dropped to his knees right there on the hardwood floor, the wet fabric of his shirt clinging to his chest. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face, his pride thoroughly broken. Please, Maya, he begged, his voice a pathetic, trembling whisper. I have nothing left. You took my money, my business, my dignity. Just leave me my public name. The Black Excellence Gala is this Saturday. The entire community will be there. The mayor, the investors, our church leaders. If I do not show up, or if I show up as a bankrupt failure, my life in this city is over. I am begging you on my hands and knees. Just give me this one night to maintain my dignity. Let me attend the gala as your husband. Give me one last chance to save face. I looked down at the man kneeling in a puddle of spilled coffee and shattered lies. I stood up, smoothing the front of my tailored suit. Fine, I said, my voice cold and precise. Wear your best suit. The sheer horror contorting Marcus's face was a masterpiece. When the name of the Apex Investment Fund dropped from my lips, the fabricated bravado drained entirely from his body. He stumbled backward on the manicured lawn, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He knew instantly that his final $10 million lifeline was not a miraculous venture capital rescue. It was my trap. Without uttering another word to the police or the Child Protective Services worker, Marcus turned and sprinted toward his rental car. He scrambled inside, slammed the door, and peeled out of the neighborhood, tires screeching against the asphalt. I was running out of time, and he knew it. As my private driver smoothly navigated the Atlanta traffic behind him, I knew exactly where my desperate husband was heading. He was not going to his lawyer. He was going to Midtown to secure the only tangible assets he had left. For the past year, Marcus had been siphoning funds from the company to play sugar daddy to a 22-year-old fitness model named Alicia. He had leased her a penthouse apartment and filled it with Cartier watches, diamond tennis bracelets, and limited edition Birkin bags. He intended to sweep through that apartment, snatch up those luxury goods, and pawn them to fund his legal defense. What Marcus failed to realize was that I had been tracking his financial infidelity for 10 months. I arrived at the luxury high-rise 15 minutes before he did, bypassing the concierge with a generous tip and heading straight for the penthouse. When Marcus finally burst through the heavy mahogany door of the apartment chest, heaving and sweat pouring down his face, he froze dead in his tracks. He had rushed in holding an empty duffel bag ready to ransack the place. Instead, he found me sitting comfortably on Alicia's curved velvet sofa, elegantly crossing my legs and taking a slow, deliberate sip from a porcelain espresso cup. Alicia stood next to the kitchen island, her arms crossed tight over her chest, staring at Marcus with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. Maya Marcus choked out, dropping the duffel bag to the hardwood floor. What are you doing here? How did you get in here? Alicia invited me in, I said, setting the espresso cup down on the glass coffee table. We have been having the most enlightening conversation about your fake tech empire. Marcus immediately shifted into his default mode of aggressive manipulation. He stepped toward Alicia, raising his hands in a placating gesture. Baby, listen to me. This woman is crazy. She is my obsessed ex-business partner. She is trying to ruin my life because I refuse to sell her my company. Do not listen to a single lie she tells you. Alicia did not soften. She picked up a thick stack of financial ledgers from the kitchen counter and threw them violently at his chest. The heavy papers slapped against his shirt and fluttered to the floor. You told me you were a single tech billionaire, Alicia shouted, her voice shaking with rage. You told me you were building an empire. This woman just showed me your actual bank statements, Marcus. You are married, you have a 3-year-old son, and you do not even own the company you brag about. You are millions of dollars in debt. Every single dinner, every vacation, every piece of jewelry you bought me was funded by your wife's venture capital firm. You are a broke, lying parasite. Marcus panicked. He abandoned the lie and pivoted straight to greed. He lunged toward the bedroom door, his eyes darting frantically toward the custom vanity where the jewelry boxes were kept. Fine, Marcus yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. Believe whatever you want, but those diamonds and those bags belong to my company. I bought them and I am taking them back right now. I raised a single finger, stopping him dead in his tracks. Actually, Marcus, you cannot take a single item from this apartment. He spun around, glaring at me. Watch me, he snarled. I pulled a notarized legal document from my briefcase. You bought those items using a corporate account registered to M Holdings LLC. Since I am the sole owner of that corporation, those items are legally my company's assets. However, I felt terrible that Alicia was dragged into your pathetic web of lies. So an hour ago, I had my legal team draft a deed of gift. I officially transferred full ownership of every single luxury item in this apartment to Alicia. They are classified as a corporate severance bonus. If you touch one bag or one watch, she has the absolute legal right to have you arrested for grand larceny. Marcus looked at the document, then at Alicia, who was already holding a large Louis Vuitton travel bag stuffed to the brim with velvet jewelry boxes. His face crumpled as the reality of his absolute poverty crashed down on him. He had no house, no company, no credit cards, and now no hidden assets to pawn. Alicia grabbed her iced coffee off the counter. She marched right up to Marcus, who was too stunned to move. You make me sick, she whispered. With a sharp flick of her wrist, she threw the entire cup of iced coffee directly into his face. The dark brown liquid splashed across his eyes, soaking into his expensive dress shirt and dripping pathetically down his chin. Alicia stepped over the ruined financial documents, walked out the front door with her designer bags, and slammed it shut behind her. Marcus slowly wiped the coffee from his eyes. His breathing was ragged. The arrogant, abusive man who had ordered me to apologize to his racist sister-in-law at a cookout was completely gone. He dropped to his knees right there on the hardwood floor, the wet fabric of his shirt clinging to his chest. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face, his pride thoroughly broken. Please, Maya, he begged, his voice a pathetic, trembling whisper. I have nothing left. You took my money, my business, my dignity. Just leave me my public name. The Black Excellence Gala is this Saturday. The entire community will be there. The investors, our church leaders. If I do not show up, or if I show up as a bankrupt failure, my life in this city is over. I am begging you on my hands and knees. Just give me this one night to maintain my dignity. Let me attend the gala as your husband. Give me one last chance to save face. I looked down at the man kneeling in a puddle of spilled coffee and shattered lies. I stood up, smoothing the front of my tailored suit. Fine, I said, my voice cold and precise. Wear your best suit. The promise of maintaining his dignity for one last night was the only thing keeping Marcus breathing. While he scrambled to dry clean his custom tuxedo, his mother was financing her own delusion across town. Brenda stood in an exclusive boutique staring at an emerald gown that cost more than her bank balance. Marcus had called her hours earlier, spinning a frantic lie. He promised her his company was closing a $10 million deal with the Apex Investment Fund at the Black Excellence Gala, assuring her Their temporary housing crisis was a minor administrative error. Blinded by her relentless need for social superiority, Brenda believed him completely. She marched straight to a predatory lending office, taking out a high-interest cash advance against her depleted retirement accounts to purchase the gown. She desperately needed to look like the wealthy, untouchable matriarch of a visionary tech billionaire at the absolute most prestigious social and business event in the entire city, entirely unaware she was actively financing her own immediate financial funeral. Meanwhile, across the city, far above the glittering downtown skyline, I was patiently and methodically orchestrating that exact same financial funeral. The top floor conference room of my venture capital firm was littered with empty espresso cups and towering stacks of financial ledgers. My team of forensic accountants had been working alongside me for 48 consecutive hours. We were executing a flawless, legally impenetrable hostile takeover. My lead accountant, a sharp woman named Valerie, slid the final dossier across the glass table. The numbers were damning. We had successfully traced every single dollar Marcus had embezzled, mapped out his fraudulent loan applications, and documented his gross mismanagement of tech solutions. Because my shell company, M Holdings LLC, was his primary creditor, I held the right to call in his debts immediately. When he inevitably defaulted, the corporate bylaws allowed me to seize his equity as collateral. By 3 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, the ink was dry. I did not just own his debt anymore, I officially owned 80% of his entire company. I held his entire existence in the palm of my hand. The highly anticipated annual Black Excellence Gala was the undisputed crown jewel of Atlanta's elite society. The grand ballroom of the downtown hotel was transformed into a breathtaking display of wealth, culture, and influence. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over hundreds of influential business leaders, politicians, and socialites. Marcus and Brenda made their grand entrance right on schedule, walking down the crimson carpet as if they owned the entire building. Marcus wore his tailored black tuxedo, plastering a charismatic, relaxed smile on his face, playing the role of the triumphant CEO to absolute perfection. Brenda walked proudly beside him, her heavily sequined emerald gown sparkling under the flashing cameras of local society photographers. They spent the first hour of the cocktail reception shaking hands, networking, and loudly hinting to anyone who would listen about a massive $10 million acquisition that Marcus was about to finalize. I arrived an hour later, stepping out of my town car in a custom crimson silk gown that hugged every curve perfectly. The color was deliberate, a vibrant symbol of absolute power. As I glided into the ballroom, heads turned. The soft murmur of conversations paused as people took in my entrance. Marcus and Brenda were holding court near the center of the room, surrounded by a group of prominent church elders and city council members. When Brenda spotted me, her eyes narrowed with immediate, visceral disgust. She leaned over and whispered something to Marcus, who quickly adjusted his posture, puffing out his chest to project dominance. Instead of avoiding them, I walked directly toward their circle, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished marble floor. Brenda sneered, looking me up and down with exaggerated pity. "Maya," she said, her voice carrying just enough volume to ensure the surrounding guests could hear. "I am honestly surprised you showed up tonight. I thought you would be too embarrassed to show your face after the childish tantrum you threw with the police. Marcus is about to announce a historic funding deal tonight. You should probably stand in the back so you do not ruin his photos." Marcus smirked, emboldened by his mother's audacity and the presence of their influential audience. "You really should not have come, Maya," he added smoothly, playing the part of the long-suffering husband. "This event is for serious business leaders. But since you are here, try to keep a low profile. I have important investors arriving soon, and I cannot have your emotional instability jeopardizing my $10 million valuation." I did not react to their pathetic attempts at humiliation. I simply smiled, taking a slow sip from a crystal flute of sparkling water. "You are absolutely right, Marcus," I replied, my voice perfectly steady and loud enough for his audience to catch every word. "Serious business leaders are indeed about to take the stage. I highly suggest you pay close attention to the presentation." Before Marcus could formulate a response, the heavy ballroom doors closed and the house lights dimmed. The upbeat jazz music faded into silence as the bright spotlight hit the center stage. The master of ceremonies stepped up to the polished mahogany podium and tapped the microphone. The expansive room fell completely silent. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," the master of ceremonies announced, his deep voice booming through the state-of-the-art sound system. "Tonight we celebrate innovation, resilience, and the relentless drive of our community's finest leaders. We have a highly anticipated announcement regarding one of the city's most talked-about tech companies. Ladies and gentlemen, please direct your attention to the stage and join me in welcoming the lead representative of the prestigious Apex Investment Fund, the brilliant new absolute majority shareholder who just officially acquired 80% of Tech Solutions and will be taking over corporate operations immediately. Please give a warm round of applause for Maya Miller." The collective gasp that sucked the air out of the grand ballroom was palpable. The master of ceremonies stepped back from the mahogany podium, extending a welcoming hand in my direction. For 5 agonizing seconds, nobody moved. Hundreds of Atlanta's most influential power brokers, politicians, and socialites simply stared at me in stunned, breathless silence. The only sound cutting through the heavy atmosphere was the sharp, distinct shatter of crystal. Marcus had completely lost his grip. His expensive wine glass slipped from his trembling fingers, exploding against the polished marble floor and sending a spray of dark red Cabernet across his tailored tuxedo pants. His jaw hung slack, his eyes bulging as the reality of my absolute dominance finally registered in his hollow mind. The $10 million lifeline he had been bragging about all evening was never real. I was Apex. I owned him. I did not spare him a single glance of pity as I began my walk toward the stage. The sea of wealthy guests naturally parted for me, creating a clear, dramatic path to the podium. Photographers scrambled their camera flashes, erupting in a blinding frenzy to capture the stunning twist of the evening. But before I could reach the velvet-roped steps of the stage, a frantic figure shoved her way through the crowd, desperate to halt my momentum. Chloe planted herself squarely in my path. Her face was flushed with a toxic cocktail of panic and sheer unadulterated entitlement. She positioned herself deliberately in front of the largest cluster of press photographers, her white savior complex completely overriding her basic survival instincts. She thought she could publicly embarrass me, dragging me back down to the subordinate position she believed I belonged in. "Maya, you need to stop this pathetic charade right now," Chloe hissed, her voice vibrating with shrill arrogance loud enough for the nearest journalist to catch every word. "You are making an absolute fool of yourself. You cannot just waltz into a Black Excellence event and pretend you are some corporate titan. I know about your little shell companies, and I have already contacted my father's law firm. If you take one more step toward that stage, we will expose you for corporate fraud. Now turn around, walk out the back door, and stop humiliating my husband's family before I have security throw you out." The sheer audacity of her standing in my way, wearing a designer gown bought with my stolen money, was almost poetic. The cameras were recording every second of her aggressive, privileged outburst. I stopped inches from her face, towering over her in my crimson silk gown. I maintained a chilling, serene smile. "Chloe," I said, my voice projecting clearly over the low murmur of the surrounding crowd, "it is incredibly bold of you to bring up corporate fraud in front of the financial press, especially considering the very precarious legal situation you put yourself in this morning." Her confident sneer wavered just a fraction. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, crossing her arms defensively. I reached into the hidden pocket of my clutch and pulled out a small encrypted flash drive, holding it up just enough for the cameras to catch the metallic glint. "I have spent the last 48 hours auditing Marcus's accounts," I explained smoothly. "And while tracing the funds your husband David embezzled from my company, my forensic accountants stumbled upon something truly fascinating. They found the offshore accounts connected to your precious inner-city youth charity, the same foundation you love to brag about at your country club luncheons to prove how progressive and generous you are." Chloe's arms dropped to her sides. The blood rapidly drained from her face, leaving her looking sickly pale under the harsh chandelier lights. It turns out I continued, taking a deliberate step closer to her, forcing her to shrink back. "Your charity has not funded a single community project in 3 years. Instead, You have been using the Foundation's tax-exempt status to aggressively launder the money David stole from Marcus. You set up a web of fake vendor invoices funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars directly into your personal trust fund. That is not just a minor accounting error, Chloe. That is a federal crime. That is massive wire fraud and tax evasion. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted frantically toward the journalists who were furiously typing on their phones, sensing the massive scandal unfolding right in front of them. And since I am now the majority shareholder of Tech Solutions, I added, my voice dropping to a lethal, icy whisper. I am legally obligated to report any financial irregularities involving corporate funds. I sent the entire digital paper trail to the Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigation exactly 1 hour ago. You should probably stop worrying about my shell companies and start looking for a criminal defense attorney who specializes in federal prison sentences. The absolute terror that consumed Chloe's features was spectacular. The arrogant, untouchable shield of her racial and social privilege completely shattered into dust. She looked at the flashing cameras, then at the wealthy guests who were now whispering and pointing directly at her. Stripped of her fake moral superiority and facing imminent federal indictment, her knees visibly buckled. She did not say another word. Chloe turned on her heel and frantically pushed her way through the crowd, fleeing the red carpet and literally running toward the hotel exit like a terrified fugitive. I seamlessly resumed my walk, leaving the destruction of my sister-in-law behind me. I ascended the velvet steps with predatory grace, stepping up to the polished mahogany podium. The ballroom was completely electrified, a buzzing hive of shock and anticipation. Marcus dropped his head, finally realizing he was completely ruined. I stepped up to the podium, camera flashes popping continuously. I tapped the microphone lightly. Today, I have two very important announcements regarding Tech Solutions. First, as the newly appointed majority shareholder, representing the Apex Investment Fund, I am initiating an immediate and comprehensive restructuring of Tech Solutions. My voice echoed through the cavernous ballroom, crisp and unwavering over the state-of-the-art sound system. I looked out over the sea of upturned faces. The elite of Atlanta's Black society stood absolutely paralyzed, their champagne flutes suspended in midair. I let my gaze sweep past the prominent politicians, the wealthy investors, and the influential church elders before locking my eyes directly onto my husband. He was standing near the front, his tuxedo stained with spilled wine, his chest heaving with panicked, shallow breaths. Due to gross financial mismanagement, severe fiduciary negligence, and a complete failure to deliver on fiduciary duties, I continued, my tone elegant, but laced with pure lethal precision. Effective immediately, Marcus Miller is officially terminated from his position as Chief Executive Officer of Tech Solutions. He no longer represents the company in any capacity, and his access to all corporate assets has been permanently revoked. The grand ballroom erupted. Hundreds of distinguished guests broke into a chaotic frenzy of whispers, gasps, and sharp murmurs. Women in designer gowns leaned into their husbands. Businessmen exchanged bewildered, alarmed glances, and journalists frantically typed on their glowing smartphones. It was a brutal, instantaneous public execution of Marcus's carefully curated reputation. The man who had walked down the red carpet an hour ago playing the triumphant, untouchable visionary was now being publicly discarded like worthless trash. Marcus could not handle the sheer magnitude of his humiliation. His fragile ego shattered completely. "You cannot do this!" He roared, his voice cracking with a desperate, guttural fury. He lunged forward, trying to shove his way past a row of seated investors to rush the stage. "I built that company. You are a lying, vindictive snake." I did not even make it to the first velvet step. Two massive, broad-shouldered private security guards wearing dark suits stepped smoothly into his path. They were highly trained professionals I had personally hired for this exact scenario. They did not hesitate. One guard planted a firm, unyielding hand squarely against Marcus's chest, shoving him backward with enough force to make him stumble over his own expensive leather shoes. The second guard stepped up, crossing his arms, forming an impenetrable human wall between my disgraced husband and my stage. Marcus thrashed wildly against them, his face turning a mottled, furious shade of red, but he was completely powerless. He was trapped on the floor, forced to look up at me while I dismantled his entire life. I did not flinch at his shouting. I did not break my composed, radiant smile. Instead, I reached into the folds of my crimson silk gown, pulled out a small black remote, and pressed a single button. The massive 30-foot LED screen suspended behind me suddenly flared to life, casting a stark, blinding white light over the darkened ballroom. A collective gasp rippled through the audience as high-definition images, bar graphs, and highlighted bank statements flashed across the screen. Please direct your attention to the forensic audit report displayed behind me. I instructed, my voice cutting through the noise and demanding absolute authority. For the past 2 years, Tech Solutions has not developed a single viable piece of software. It has not secured a single legitimate corporate contract. Instead, it has operated entirely as a fraudulent shell, a personal slush fund designed to finance the extravagant, deceitful lifestyle of a man who preyed on the trust of his own community. I clicked the remote again. The screen transitioned to a detailed ledger, magnifying specific wire transfers and matching them with luxury receipts. I leaned into the microphone, my eyes locking onto the specific victims in the crowd. Reverend Thomas, I said, my voice echoing with solemn gravity. I see you standing in the third row. Last year, your congregation entrusted Tech Solutions with a $200,000 community development grant. I am deeply sorry to inform you that your church's money did not go toward creating jobs for inner-city youth. According to the audit, Marcus transferred those exact funds to a private offshore account, which he then used to lease a luxury midtown penthouse for his 22-year-old fitness model mistress. Reverend Thomas dropped his hands to his sides, his face contorting with profound shock and righteous anger. The murmurs in the crowd escalated into angry, hostile shouts. Councilman Davis, I continued, smoothly clicking to the next damning slide. The $50,000 minority business subsidy your office awarded him last quarter was instantly liquidated. It was spent entirely at the Cartier boutique in Lenox Square to purchase custom diamond tennis bracelets for that same mistress. Every single investor in this room has been systematically robbed. Your hard-earned money, your generational wealth, and your community resources were stolen by a man who stood in front of you tonight bragging about his fake empire. The ballroom descended into absolute chaos. The elite, refined facade of the Black Excellence Gala vanished, replaced by the raw, furious outrage of powerful people who realized they had been conned. Investors turned on Marcus, shouting demands for their money. Businessmen pointed accusing fingers at him, their voices thick with disgust. The security guards had to physically brace themselves to keep the angry crowd from swarming the disgraced former CEO. Marcus was sweating profusely, his eyes darting around the hostile room, utterly terrified, as the elite community he so desperately wanted to impress actively turned against him. He was a dead man walking. Suddenly, a shrill, hysterical shriek pierced through the angry shouts. Brenda pushed her way violently through the crowd of furious investors. She elbowed a prominent local politician out of her way, her sequined emerald gown catching the harsh light of the LED screen. She marched right up to the edge of the security line, her face twisted in a mask of desperate, toxic, matriarchal rage. "Stop this right now!" Brenda screamed at the top of her lungs, pointing a trembling finger up at me on the stage. "Have you no shame, you evil, bitter woman? He is your husband. You are supposed to stand by him. Family is supposed to protect each other. You cover for your own blood, you do not destroy him in front of the whole world. You are airing our private business just to be spiteful." The room quieted just a fraction, the guests turning to watch the matriarch defend her indefensible son. She stood there, chest heaving, weaponizing the very concept of family loyalty that she had denied me for my entire marriage. She thought invoking the sacred rule of family protection would shame me into submission. I looked down at Brenda from my elevated podium. I let a slow, chilling smile curve my lips. I tapped the remote against the wooden podium, the soft clicking sound echoing through the tense microphone. Family must protect each other. I repeated, my voice dropping to a dangerously calm, echoing whisper that sent a shiver through the entire ballroom. That is a beautiful sentiment, Brenda. I raised the remote and clicked the button one more time. Then let us see exactly how your precious family has protected you. The massive LED screen flickered instantly, replacing Marcus's offshore ledgers with a scan of an official legal document. It was a commercial mortgage agreement. The bright background illuminated the shocked faces of the elite crowd. At the bottom of the document, magnified so every curve of dark ink was visible, was a highly recognizable signature. Brenda Miller. Brenda stopped her aggressive march toward the stage. She froze, her sequined emerald gown catching the harsh light as she stared up at the screen. Her mouth dropped open in genuine confusion. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice losing its previous venom and replacing it with a trembling quiver. "I never took out a commercial mortgage. My house has been fully paid off for more than 30 long years." I stepped closer to the edge of the stage. "You are absolutely right, Brenda," I said, my voice carrying a solemn weight that commanded the absolute silence of the room. "You did not take out this mortgage, but someone else did. I want you to look closely at the property address on page 2. I clicked the remote. The screen zoomed in on the property description. A collective gasp rippled through the attendees. The church elders and local politicians recognized that address immediately. It was the Miller Heritage Home. It was the sprawling brick estate built by Brenda's grandfather during segregation, a symbol of Black generational wealth. It was the undisputed crown jewel of their entire family identity, the foundation of Brenda's arrogant social standing in Atlanta. "No," Brenda whispered, her hands flying to her face, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it looked physical. "No, that is impossible. The legacy house is in a protected family trust. It absolutely cannot be leveraged. It can be leveraged if the primary trustee signs off on a corporate loan." I corrected her, my tone devoid of mercy. 2 years ago, when tech solutions began to bleed cash, Marcus realized he needed capital to hide his gross incompetence from his investors. He needed millions to mask his failures and continue funding the luxury penthouse for his mistress. So he went to a predatory lending firm. He offered them the only piece of true collateral he had access to: your home. Marcus was hyperventilating now. He scrambled backward across the polished floor, desperately trying to distance himself from his mother, his eyes darting toward the exits. He was trapped by the private security guards, unable to escape the crushing truth. "But I never signed anything." Brenda shrieked, her voice cracking violently, her pristine social image dissolving into hysteria. "I never gave him permission to touch my grandfather's house. I never signed that paper." "I know you did not, Brenda," I replied smoothly. "I hired a forensic handwriting expert to analyze the loan documents. The signature on the screen behind me is a desperate forgery. Your golden child, the son you just publicly humiliated yourself to protect, falsified your signature. He committed severe bank fraud and identity theft. He stole the Miller Heritage Home right out from under you, mortgaged your generational wealth to the limit, and blew every penny on a fake business and a 22-year-old girl. Because he defaulted on those loans this morning, the bank initiated an expedited foreclosure. You are currently homeless, Brenda. The bank owns the estate now." The silence was heavy and apocalyptic. Brenda slowly turned around to face her son. The maternal protection that had blinded her for 36 years evaporated, replaced by raw devastation. Her status in the church, her position in the country club, her superiority over women like me, it was all anchored to the bricks of that generational estate. Marcus had not just stolen her money. He had stripped her of her identity in front of the most powerful people in the city. "Mom, I can explain," Marcus stammered, raising his hands defensively. "I was going to pay it back. I just needed more time. The investors were going to come through." Brenda did not let him finish. She let out an agonizing scream that echoed off the crystal chandeliers. She lunged forward with terrifying speed, completely disregarding the hundreds of people watching her. She raised her hand and delivered a devastating slap directly across Marcus's face. Marcus stumbled hard against a cocktail table. Brenda did not stop. She launched herself at him, tearing at his expensive tuxedo jacket, beating her fists against his chest as she sobbed hysterically. "You stole my house. You stole your grandfather's legacy. You worthless, disgusting liar. You ruined me." The immaculate superior Miller family structure was publicly and violently tearing itself to shreds. The elite audience watched in absolute horror as the untouchable matriarch physically attacked her golden son. Standing near the edge of the chaotic scene, Chloe realized the ship was sinking. She saw the violent collapse of her husband's family and knew her own wealth was gone. Panic gripped her chest. She needed to escape the ballroom before the press turned their cameras on her and asked about the federal fraud charges I had just exposed. She kept her head down, desperately weaving through the distracted crowd. Chloe reached the expansive mahogany bar, her hands shaking violently as she threw her sleek titanium credit card onto the polished wood. "Close it out," she hissed at the bartender, constantly looking over her shoulder. "Right now." The stoic bartender picked up the heavy metal card. He swiped it through the terminal. The machine beeped a sharp negative tone. He frowned, wiped the magnetic strip against his apron, and inserted the chip. The terminal beeped again, flashing red. He looked straight up at Chloe, his expression entirely unsympathetic and cold. He slowly slid the heavy titanium card back across the polished mahogany counter. "I am genuinely sorry, Mom," the bartender calmly said, his deep, unwavering voice loud enough for all the surrounding guests to hear perfectly clearly. "Your exclusive titanium credit card has just been officially declined. Do you have any idea who you are talking to?" Chloe screeched, her voice slicing through the heavy, shocked silence of the ballroom bar. She snatched the titanium card off the polished mahogany counter, her face turning a violent shade of crimson. "Run it again. Your machine is obviously broken. Do not just stand there looking at me with that incompetent, lazy expression. Run the damn card. My father is a senior partner at the biggest law firm in this state, and I will have you fired, blacklisted, and scrubbing toilets by tomorrow morning if you do not fix this immediately." The bartender did not flinch. He maintained his stoic professional posture, crossing his arms over his crisp vest. "I ran it 3 times, ma'am. The account is frozen due to suspected fraudulent activity. I cannot serve you." Chloe slammed her hands against the bar, leaning over to scream directly into the bartender's face. Her performative, progressive facade had entirely vanished, exposing the raw, ugly entitlement she normally kept hidden behind charity luncheons and forced smiles. "You listen to me, you worthless nobody. You are deliberately humiliating me. Get your manager out here right now. I will not be treated like some street trash by the hired help at a Black Excellence event. I demand respect." David finally caught up to his wife, rushing over from the edge of the crowd where he had been hiding since his mother's explosive breakdown. He grabbed Chloe by the elbow, desperately trying to pull her away from the bar. "Chloe, stop it," he hissed, his eyes darting frantically around the room at the disgusted faces of Atlanta's elite. "People are staring. We need to leave quietly. Just put the card away." She ripped her arm out of his grasp, her diamond bracelets clinking sharply. "I will not be quiet, David. Fix this. Call the bank. Call Marcus. Do something useful for once in your pathetic life. Nobody is calling the bank, Chloe." My voice cut through her hysterical rant like a freshly sharpened blade. The crowd parted once again as I walked calmly toward the bar, my crimson silk gown trailing behind me. I stopped right next to David, who visibly shrank away from my presence. I did not raise my voice, but the absolute authority in my tone made Chloe snap her mouth shut. "Your accounts are frozen because I froze them," I stated clearly, letting the reality sink into her arrogant mind. "You see, when I acquired Tech Solutions this afternoon, I also acquired the legal right to audit every single outgoing expense. And what my forensic accountants found was a massive, sloppy trail of embezzlement leading directly to your joint checking accounts." Before Chloe could formulate another shrill, entitled excuse, I lifted a thick, heavy legal dossier from my clutch. I did not hand it to them gently. I threw it forcefully, letting the heavy stack of official court documents strike David squarely in the chest before scattering across the polished bar counter. "That is a formal civil lawsuit and a copy of the criminal referral I just submitted to the district attorney," I announced, ensuring the surrounding investors and politicians heard every single word. "The total amount your husband siphoned from the corporate accounts to fund your luxury lifestyle exceeds $500,000. In the state of Georgia, that is not a simple misunderstanding. That is grand larceny. It is a first-degree felony, carrying a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 to 15 years in state prison." David stared down at the documents resting on the bar, his face draining of all color. The word prison echoed in the tense space. He looked at the official stamp of the district attorney, his breathing becoming shallow and erratic. The illusion of his wealthy, sophisticated life evaporated, leaving behind nothing but a terrified, unemployed man facing a decade behind bars. Chloe immediately turned on him, her eyes wide with panic. "David," she demanded, poking him hard in the chest. "Tell her she is lying. Tell her you earned that money. Call my father right now and tell him to sue this bitter, vindictive woman." David did not call her father. He did not defend his wife. Instead, the sheer terror of facing federal time completely broke his fragile loyalty. He took a violent step back, physically pushing Chloe away from him as if she were carrying a deadly disease. "I never wanted any of this." David screamed, his voice cracking with panicked desperation. The elegant, supportive husband routine died right there on the ballroom floor. He pointed an accusing finger directly at Chloe's face, throwing her entirely under the bus to save his own skin. It was her. It was always her. She demanded the Aspen vacations. She demanded the country club memberships. She said if I could not provide the lifestyle her rich white friends had, she would divorce me and take everything. She drained me dry. I only took that money because she forced me to. She is a parasite. Chloe recoiled, her mouth opening in silent, absolute horror. "David," she gasped, her voice barely a whisper. "I am not going to prison for your designer bags, Chloe," David yelled, completely abandoning any shred of dignity. He shoved the legal documents back at her, turned on his heel, and ran. He literally sprinted through the crowded ballroom, violently pushing past distinguished guests and waiters, fleeing the hotel and abandoning his wife to face the wreckage alone. Chloe stood frozen at the bar, utterly isolated. The wealthy black elite she had always felt superior to were now looking at her with undisguised contempt and pity. She had no money, no husband, and a looming felony indictment. Her white savior complex had been crushed into dust, leaving her with absolutely nothing. While the crowd remained fixated on Chloe's spectacular, humiliating downfall, Marcus was slinking through the shadows near the rear exit. His mother was still sobbing on the floor. His brother had fled and his company was gone, but his narcissistic delusion refused to accept total defeat. He spotted a tall, distinguished older man standing near the VIP tables. It was Reginald Vance, one of the most powerful, ruthless billionaire board members in the Southern Financial District. Marcus wiped the sweat from his forehead, his eyes darting frantically. He pulled a folded, hastily printed document from his jacket pocket. It was a completely fabricated financial report he had doctored weeks ago as a backup plan. He crept up beside the billionaire, leaning in close to whisper a desperate, venomous lie. "Mr. Vance," Marcus muttered, his voice trembling with manic urgency, "you cannot let Maya take over this fund. I have proof. She is engaging in massive illegal market manipulation. She is using insider trading to destroy my company. Look at these documents. If you back me, we can take her down together tonight." "Mr. Vance," Marcus whispered, his voice trembling with manic urgency, "you cannot let Maya take over this fund. I have proof. She is engaging in massive illegal market manipulation. She is using insider trading to destroy my company. Look at these documents. If you back me, we can take her down together tonight." Marcus shoved the hastily printed financial report into the hands of Reginald Vance. The older billionaire stood near the VIP tables, an imposing figure in a custom-tailored tuxedo. Reginald Vance was a titan in the Southern Financial District, a man who had built a massive fortune in logistics and real estate. To Marcus, this man represented the ultimate old schoolboys club. Marcus desperately believed that a billionaire of Vance's stature would naturally side with a fellow businessman over an overly ambitious woman making a public scene. "I know how these corporate structures work," Mr. Vance, Marcus pleaded. He stepped closer to ensure the surrounding guests could not hear his frantic whispering. "Maya is using predatory tactics. She manipulated the debt market to force my company into default. This piece of paper proves she transferred company assets illegally to manufacture a crisis. With your influence on the board, we can call an emergency vote right now. We can freeze her out. We can have her arrested for corporate espionage. I just need your backing. You know I am a good investment." Marcus wiped a thick bead of sweat from his forehead. His breathing was shallow and ragged. He looked at Reginald Vance with wide, bloodshot eyes, silently begging for the powerful man to validate his fragile ego and save him from absolute ruin. Reginald Vance did not immediately respond. He stood perfectly still, his posture radiating an intimidating calm. He looked down at the crumpled spreadsheet Marcus had shoved into his hands. His expression remained entirely unreadable. The ballroom around them was still buzzing with the chaotic fallout of Chloe being exposed at the bar, but in this small corner the tension was suffocating. Slowly and deliberately, Reginald Vance reached up and removed his expensive tortoiseshell reading glasses. He folded them and slipped them into his breast pocket. He looked Marcus up and down, his eyes filled with a profound, chilling disgust. "You truly are a spectacular disappointment," Marcus Vance said. His voice was a deep, resonant baritone that commanded instant obedience. It lacked any trace of the camaraderie or sympathy Marcus had desperately hoped for. Marcus blinked, his frantic smile freezing on his face. "Sir, I do not think you understand." "I understand perfectly," Vance interrupted, his tone sharp enough to cut glass. "I understand that you just handed me a forged financial document printed on standard hotel business center paper. I understand that you are currently sweating through your ruined tuxedo because you just watched your mother lose her ancestral home due to your pathetic greed. And I understand that you think I am foolish enough to fall for the frantic lies of a cornered thief." Marcus stumbled back a half step. "Mr. Vance, please, you have to listen to me. She is destroying a Black-owned business. Do not you dare weaponize our community to cover your crimes," Vance growled. He stepped forward and forced Marcus to retreat. "You did not build a business. You built a parasite. You stole from your own people to fund a lifestyle you never earned. And you severely underestimated the woman you married." Vance held up the forged document, then calmly ripped it straight down the middle. "Let me clarify a few things for you, Marcus. I am not just a board member. I am a senior strategic advisor. And I do not work for you. I work for Maya. She planted me on your board of directors exactly 2 years ago." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow to the stomach. His legs nearly gave out. "That is right," Vance continued, his voice dripping with righteous satisfaction. "Maya foresaw your financial incompetence long before you drained your first account. She asked me to monitor your ledgers from the inside. I have watched every single fraudulent wire transfer you made. I documented every time you lied to the shareholders. I gathered the evidence Maya needed to execute tonight's hostile takeover. I am not your lifeline, Marcus. I am the architect of your cage." Marcus opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The room started to spin. The realization that Maya had surrounded him, infiltrated his board, and outsmarted him for 2 entire years was completely paralyzing. He was totally isolated. He had no money, no family, and no powerful allies. Reginald Vance did not wait for Marcus to find his voice. He reached into his tailored tuxedo jacket and pulled out a sleek smartphone. He did not dial a local police precinct. He dialed a direct private line. Marcus watched in pure terror as Vance brought the phone to his ear. "Mr. Vance, wait," Marcus begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine. "Please do not do this. I can fix it. I will sign whatever she wants." Vance ignored him completely. "Agent Carter Vance," said into the phone, his voice echoing with absolute finality. "This is Reginald Vance. I am currently at the downtown Grand Hotel ballroom. I have eyes on Marcus Miller. Yes, the target of the ongoing wire fraud and embezzlement investigation. He is a flight risk. He just attempted to present falsified corporate documents to a board member. Send your teams in." "No," Marcus gasped. He dropped to his knees right there on the expensive hotel carpet. "Please, not the feds. I will give her the company. Just let me walk away." Vance looked down at the pathetic, broken man groveling at his feet. "You do not have a company to give, Marcus. You have nothing but a massive federal prison sentence waiting for you." The luxurious ambience of the Black Excellence Gala was suddenly shattered by a sound that made Marcus's blood run completely cold. It started as a faint, high-pitched wail in the distance, quickly amplifying into a deafening roar. The piercing, unmistakable scream of multiple heavy-duty sirens echoed down the downtown streets, converging directly on the hotel. The heavy bass of the jazz music that had been playing softly in the background was entirely drowned out by the approaching fleet of government vehicles. Guests stopped their conversations, turning their heads toward the glowing windows in absolute shock. The flashing lights cast long, intimidating shadows across the polished marble floor. Marcus took a stumbling step backward, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He was completely trapped. The exits were blocked by confused socialites and angry investors. The brilliant red headlights of the armored tactical trucks reflected directly in Marcus's terrified eyes. His fraudulent empire had not just crumbled, it was about to be locked in a federal evidence box. He realized with crushing finality that his physical freedom was ending right now. The heavy glass doors of the grand ballroom burst open with deafening force. Dozens of federal agents wearing tactical gear, emblazoned with bold yellow FBI lettering, swarmed into the luxurious space. The polished illusion of the Black Excellence Gala evaporated in a single instant. The elite guests who had just spent the evening sipping champagne and judging the spectacular collapse of the Miller family now scattered like terrified prey. Prominent politicians, wealthy real estate developers, and socialites shoved each other aside, desperate to clear a path and avoid being associated with an active federal raid. Marcus remained frozen on the expensive hotel carpet. He watched Agent Carter step through the shattered threshold flanked by heavily armed officers whose eyes swept the room with absolute clinical precision. The reality of federal prison, a cold concrete box, devoid of all the luxuries he had stolen, crashed down on Marcus with suffocating weight. His survival instinct violently overrode his paralysis. He could not be arrested here. He could not let the cameras capture his ultimate humiliation. Dropping lower to the floor, Marcus used the sheer chaos of the panicked crowd as his cover. He scrambled on his hands and knees behind a long row of velvet-draped VIP tables. He completely abandoned his mother Brenda, who was still sobbing hysterically near the center of the room. He abandoned his brother, his reputation, and every shred of his remaining dignity. His only thought was escape. He remembered the layout of the venue from a walkthrough months ago. Just past the lavish dessert buffets were the swinging stainless steel doors that led directly into the hotel's sprawling industrial kitchen. Beyond that kitchen lay the service corridors, the loading docks, and an alleyway that led straight into the dark, anonymous city streets. Marcus pushed himself up, keeping his head ducked below the sightline of the advancing federal agents. He sprinted toward the back of the ballroom, his ruined tuxedo jacket flapping behind him. He hit the swinging stainless steel doors with his shoulder bursting into the brightly lit, sweltering heat of the commercial kitchen. The heavy doors swung shut behind him, temporarily muffling the shouts and chaos of the ballroom. Marcus gasped for air, his chest heaving as he scanned the gleaming metal counters and steaming prep stations looking for the exit sign that marked the loading dock. I expected an empty service corridor, assuming the staff had evacuated at the sound of the police sirens. He was entirely wrong. The kitchen was not empty. Standing directly between Marcus and the loading dock exit was a solid, unyielding wall of hotel staff. Line cooks, dishwashers, servers, and prep chefs stood shoulder to shoulder. They were the black working-class men and women whom Marcus and Chloe had treated like invisible inferior servants all night. They were the people Chloe had threatened to have fired for simply doing their jobs. They were the people Marcus routinely ignored, looking right through them as if their existence offended his manufactured billionaire sensibilities. "Move!" Marcus screamed, panic making his voice crack into a high-pitched, desperate shriek. "Get out of my way right now! I am Marcus Miller. I am a VIP guest. Move aside before I have every single one of you fired." Nobody moved. The staff stood in absolute silence, staring at the pathetic, sweat-drenched man who had spent his entire life stepping on people exactly like them to climb a ladder of lies. Marcus frantically dug into his tuxedo pockets, pulling out his sleek leather wallet. He ripped out a handful of $100 bills, holding the crumpled cash out with trembling hands. "I will pay you. Take this. Just let me through that door. The feds are right behind me. Please, I need to get out of here." A tall, broad-shouldered black man wearing the white coat of an executive chef stepped forward from the line. Marcus recognized him vaguely. His name was Chef Thomas. What Marcus did not know was that just 6 months ago, when Chef Thomas was denied a commercial loan due to discriminatory banking practices, my venture capital firm had quietly stepped in. I had personally reviewed his business plan and approved a private grant to help him open his own restaurant. I treated the people in this city with the dignity they deserved, and loyalty in our community runs deeper than any corporate contract. Chef Thomas looked at the crumpled money in Marcus's shaking hand, then looked Marcus dead in the eyes. He slowly crossed his thick, muscular arms over his chest. In perfect unison, the entire kitchen staff mirrored the gesture, crossing their arms and widening their stances, creating a human barricade of aprons and chef coats. "We know exactly who you are, Mr. Miller, chef." Thomas said, his voice a deep, resonant rumble that carried the weight of absolute authority. "And more importantly, we know exactly who your wife is." Maya treats the people in this kitchen with respect. She sees us. You and your family treat us like dirt on the bottom of your expensive shoes. You steal from your own community, you lie to your own people, and you think you can buy your way out of the consequences. Put your money away. You are not going anywhere. Marcus let out a feral, terrified cry. He lunged forward, trying to physically shove his way past a young dishwasher to reach the exit door. Chef Thomas simply reached out, grabbed Marcus by the lapels of his ruined tuxedo, and shoved him violently backward. Marcus slipped on the wet, greasy tile of the dish pit and crashed hard onto the floor, landing squarely in a puddle of dirty, soapy dishwater. Before Marcus could even attempt to scramble back to his feet, the swinging stainless steel doors behind him burst violently open. A tactical squad of federal agents flooded the cramped kitchen, their weapons drawn, their heavy boots stomping against the wet tiles. "Marcus Miller, do not move a muscle," Agent Carter bellowed, stepping through the formation of officers. "Keep your hands where I can see them. Get on the ground." Marcus was already on the ground, completely surrounded, thoroughly humiliated, and entirely defeated. The working-class staff parted seamlessly to allow the federal agents to approach the disgraced CEO. Two agents grabbed Marcus roughly by the arms, hauling him up from the greasy puddle. The harsh, unforgiving reality of his situation finally set in as the agent forced his arms behind his back. The cold, heavy steel of the handcuffs snapped shut, the metallic click echoing loudly against the tiled walls as the metal bit sharply into his wrists. "You have the right to remain silent," Agent Carter recited, his voice devoid of any sympathy. "Though I highly suggest you use it, considering how much damage you have already done with your mouth tonight." They did not take him out through the discreet loading dock exit. They marched Marcus Miller right back through the swinging doors, parading him directly across the grand ballroom in front of the remaining guests. They dragged him through the main lobby and pushed him out the glass front doors of the hotel. Hundreds of press cameras, smartphones, and news crews were waiting outside in the humid night air. The blinding, relentless strobe of camera flashes illuminated Marcus's tear-stained face and his handcuffed wrists as he was forcefully shoved into the back of a waiting armored federal vehicle. The massive, heavy steel door of the Federal Detention Center clanged shut, a sound echoing. Marcus sat shivering on a rigid metal bench. His tailored tuxedo hung off his frame like a miserable rag. His arrogance had completely evaporated, replaced by a suffocating, clawing panic. I was allowed a single phone call. With trembling fingers, he dialed the only person who possessed the financial power to save him from this nightmare. Maya answered on the fourth ring. Her voice was perfectly smooth, devoid of any sleepy grogginess. Maya, Marcus pleaded, gripping the plastic receiver with both hands. "Please, baby, you have to help me. You have to come down here and pay my bail. I know I messed up, but we are husband and wife. You cannot just leave the father of your child locked in a cage. We can fix this. I will do whatever you want." The telephone line remained completely quiet for a long beat before Maya responded with a chilling, detached calm. "I will be there in 30 minutes. Have the guards bring you to the visitor partition." Marcus let out a ragged gasp of relief. He convinced himself she still loved him, that the sight of him in a cell had broken her icy exterior. He just needed to play the repentant husband to get back to the mansion. 45 minutes later, Marcus sat in a cramped visitation booth separated from the outside world by a thick pane of bulletproof glass. The heavy door opposite him swung open. Maya stepped into the sterile room. She did not look like a heartbroken wife coming to rescue her troubled husband. She looked like an apex predator who had just claimed her throne. She wore a tailored crimson pantsuit that radiated absolute power, her hair styled to perfection, her designer heels clicking rhythmically against the linoleum floor. She sat down gracefully, placing a sleek leather briefcase on the narrow counter. Marcus leaned eagerly toward the glass, picking up the attached telephone receiver. Maya, thank God, he breathed into the phone. Did you bring the bail money? Tell me I am getting out of here today. Maya picked up her receiver. I did not bring a single dime for your bail, Marcus, she said, her voice echoing through the plastic earpiece with lethal precision. I am not here to secure your release. I am here to secure my permanent freedom. Marcus froze. What do you mean? You said you were coming to help me. I said I would be here. Maya corrected sharply. You invoked our marital vows on the phone this morning. You genuinely thought you could abuse me, steal from my company, finance a mistress, and then demand my loyalty when you got caught. Maya snapped the latches of her leather briefcase. She pulled out a thick stack of legal documents securely bound in a blue backing. She slid the heavy paperwork through the narrow steel slot at the bottom of the glass partition. What is this? Marcus asked, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper. That is a finalized petition for absolute divorce, Maya stated, leaning closer to the glass. Right beneath it is a court order demanding the absolute termination of your parental rights. You will never make decisions for Leo again. You will never see him. You are going to sign those documents right now, Marcus. Marcus stared at the papers through the glass as if they were venomous snakes. I am not signing that. You cannot take my son away from me. Maya let out a short, cynical laugh. Fight me with what money, Marcus? Your bank accounts are seized. Your tech company belongs to me. You are facing 20 years in a federal penitentiary for grand larceny, wire fraud, and identity theft. If you refuse to sign these papers today, I will personally ensure that my legal team hands the federal prosecutor every single piece of evidence regarding your offshore accounts. But if you sign them, I will simply let the feds handle the evidence they already gathered. The choice is yours. Sign away your rights to my son or die in a concrete box. Marcus looked at the woman sitting across from him. She had systematically stripped away every piece of his fake empire, and now she was severing the final tie that bound them together. He picked up the cheap pen provided by the detention center. His hands shook so violently he could barely grip the plastic barrel. Tears of absolute crushing defeat streamed down his face as he pressed the ink to the paper. He signed his name on the divorce decree, flipped the page, and signed away his son. He slid the documents back. Maya carefully placed the signed papers into her briefcase and snapped it shut. She stood up, smoothing her crimson blazer. Maya, please. Marcus sobbed into the receiver, pressing his forehead against the cold, bulletproof glass. You can sit in your cell and think about the cookout, Marcus, she replied coldly. She hung up the receiver, turned on her heel, and walked out of the visitation room without looking back a single time. She walked out into the bright Atlanta morning. She had executed her plan flawlessly. The toxic anchor that had dragged her down for years was permanently severed. As she approached her town car, her smartphone vibrated sharply in her purse. She pulled it out and glanced at the caller ID. It was Brenda. Brenda sobbed hysterically on the other end of the line, her voice stripped of all its arrogance. Maya, you have to help me. I went to the church this morning to ask the pastor for help, but the entire congregation turned their backs on me. The country club revoked my membership. The bank locked me out of the Heritage Home, and I am standing on the sidewalk with 2 suitcases. I have no money and nowhere to go. Please, I am begging you right now. I instructed my private driver to head directly toward the address Brenda had frantically given me over the phone. When the sleek black town car smoothly pulled up to the curb, the sight before me was almost cinematic in its pathetic nature. Brenda, the formerly untouchable matriarch of Atlanta's black elite, sat on the dirty, sun-baked concrete sidewalk outside her foreclosed mansion. Her emerald gala gown from the night before was shoved carelessly into a cheap black trash bag, resting beside 2 vintage Louis Vuitton suitcases. Her makeup was heavily smeared down her cheeks, and the oppressive Georgia humidity had completely ruined her usually flawless silk press. When she saw my town car approaching, she scrambled to her feet, desperately wiping her face with the back of her trembling hand. She reached for the heavy door handle before my driver could even step out to assist her. Maya, she gasped, pulling herself into the plush, air-conditioned leather interior. I knew you would not leave family out on the street. I knew you had a good heart deep down inside. We can go straight to your penthouse. I can take the guest room until we sort out this terrible misunderstanding with the bank and the authorities. I can help you with Leo. I looked at her, my expression completely flat and devoid of any human sympathy. I did not offer her a bottle of water. I did not offer her a comforting word. I simply tapped the glass partition and gave my driver a completely new address. Brenda leaned back into the luxurious leather seats, letting out a long, shuddering sigh of absolute relief, completely oblivious to the destination I had just provided. She genuinely believed her elite status shielded her from the consequences of her own cruelty. The scenery outside the tinted windows began to change rapidly. We left the manicured lawns and towering oak trees of Buckhead far behind us. The upscale boutiques and fine dining restaurants faded into discount strip malls, neon-lit pawn shops, and cracked pavement. Brenda sat up straighter, her eyes darting nervously out the window. Maya, where exactly are we going? This is the South Side. This is not a safe neighborhood. My driver pulled the heavy town car into the pothole-riddled parking lot of a decaying three-story brick apartment complex. The wrought iron railings lining the walkways were heavily rusted, and the faint, chaotic sound of a domestic argument echoed from a second-floor window. Brenda shrank back against the leather seat, absolutely horrified by the grim surroundings. Maya, why are we stopping here? Tell him to turn the car around immediately. I unlocked the doors with a sharp electronic click. I turned to face my mother-in-law, reaching into my tailored blazer and pulling out a single dull brass key attached to a cheap plastic tag. I dropped the key directly into her lap. 7 years ago, I said, my voice echoing with icy surgical precision. You sat at your country club dining table and told your wealthy friends that I was nothing but a ghetto charity case. You told them that a girl from the South Side projects could never truly assimilate into high society. You explicitly pointed to this exact neighborhood and said it was where people like me belonged. Brenda stared at the cheap brass key resting on her designer skirt. Her breathing grew shallow and frantic. No, Maya. Please, you cannot leave me in a place like this. I am a prominent woman. I am a respected church elder. I belong in a luxury estate. I smiled, a sharp, merciless curve of my lips. You do not belong anywhere, Brenda. Your golden boy son mortgaged your legacy to fund his mistress, and the community you worshipped just banished you. But I am not as cruel as you are. I bought a 6-month prepaid lease for Unit 24 on the second floor. It is cramped, the plumbing rattles constantly, and the neighbors do not care about your fake social titles. You once told me this is where I belong. Now it belongs to you. Get out of my car. Brenda burst into fresh, hysterical tears. She reached out, trying to grab my hand. Maya, I am begging you on my knees. I am an old woman. I will apologize for everything I ever said to you. I will scrub your floors. I pulled my hand away in absolute disgust. My driver stepped out, opened Brenda's door, and swiftly placed her 2 heavy Louis Vuitton suitcases onto the cracked asphalt. He did not wait for her to move voluntarily. He gently but firmly guided her out of the vehicle and shut the heavy door behind her. I rolled down the tinted window just enough to deliver my final piece of advice. Welcome to your new reality, Brenda. Do not lose that key. The landlord charges $50 for a replacement, and your bank accounts are completely frozen. I watched through the rearview mirror as the town car pulled away, leaving her in the dust. Brenda stood entirely alone in the sweltering heat, surrounded by cracked pavement and overgrown weeds. She awkwardly grabbed the handles of her expensive luggage and dragged them toward the rusted stairwell. The wheels caught violently on the broken concrete, jerking her arm. For the first time in her pampered, arrogant life, there was no valet, no bellhop, and no wealthy son to carry her burdens. She hauled the heavy bags up the concrete stairs, her breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. She found Unit 24. The door was scratched and peeling. Her trembling hands struggled to fit the cheap brass key into the sticky lock. When the door finally swung open, a wave of stale, musty air hit her face. The apartment was suffocatingly small. A faded, stained floral sofa sat in the center of a cramped living room. The linoleum floor was heavily scuffed. Scuffed, and the kitchen consisted of a tiny humming refrigerator and a chipped formica countertop. Brenda dropped her designer bags. She collapsed onto the cheap sofa, burying her face in her hands. The crushing weight of her new existence broke her spirit entirely. She had lost her ancestral home. She had lost her social standing. She was now living the exact nightmare she had spent decades viciously mocking. She was completely, utterly destitute. 3 grueling days passed in absolute misery. Brenda survived on cheap canned soup purchased from a corner bodega, hiding inside the sweltering apartment, too humiliated to show her face outside. The air conditioning unit barely worked, rattling loudly in the window. She jumped at every distant police siren and flinched at every loud footstep from the neighboring units. Her cell phone remained dead, her service cut off due to non-payment. The silence of her extreme isolation was maddening. She spent endless hours staring at the peeling wallpaper, agonizing over the spectacular collapse of her entire family structure. She wondered where David had run off to, and what federal holding cell Marcus was currently rotting inside. On the 4th morning, a sudden violent pounding echoed against the thin wooden door of Unit 24. The aggressive knocking made the entire door frame rattle dangerously. Brenda gasped, clutching her chest in sheer terror. She crept toward the door, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs, terrified that the police had finally come for her too. She peered through the scratched peephole. Standing in the dingy, poorly lit hallway was not a bill collector or a hostile neighbor. Brenda quickly unbolted the lock and pulled the door open. Chloe stood there. Her formerly immaculate blonde hair was a greasy, tangled mess. Her expensive designer clothing was heavily wrinkled and stained with dirt. She was desperately dragging a heavily scuffed suitcase behind her, looking utterly destroyed. "He left me," Chloe sobbed, her voice cracking as she pushed her way past Brenda into the sweltering, cramped apartment. She dropped the scuffed suitcase onto the peeling linoleum floor. "David took the last of the cash from our emergency safe and boarded a flight to Costa Rica. He completely vanished. He left me holding the bag for everything." Brenda stared at her daughter-in-law in stunned silence. The tiny living room suddenly felt even smaller. "What do you mean he left you?" Brenda demanded, her voice rising in panic. "My son would never abandon his family." "He is a coward and a thief," Chloe screamed, her manicured hands pulling at her tangled blonde hair. "The federal investigators froze every single one of our joint accounts. The credit card companies are demanding immediate payment for over $200,000 in debt. I have absolutely nothing, Brenda. My father refused to pay for my legal defense because of the charity fraud scandal. He disowned me to protect his law firm. I am facing federal indictment and personal bankruptcy, and I do not even have money for a hotel room." Brenda sank onto the stained floral sofa, burying her face in her hands. The two women who had bonded over their shared superiority complex and mutual disdain for me were now trapped together in the exact environment they used to mock. Less than 48 hours later, my assistant alerted me that Chloe was causing a scene in the lobby of my venture capital firm. I instructed security to let her up. I wanted to see the desperation firsthand. When Chloe walked into my expansive corner office, she looked entirely defeated. The haughty, progressive white savior who loved to lecture me about corporate etiquette was gone. She stood before my massive oak desk, her shoulders slumped, wearing a cheap blazer that did not fit properly. "Maya, please," Chloe begged, her voice trembling as she clutched her purse. "I have nowhere else to go. The IRS is auditing my charity. The credit card companies are filing civil suits. If I do not show the judge that I have legitimate gainful employment, they are going to deny my bankruptcy petition, and I will go to prison for debt evasion and fraud. You are the most powerful woman I know. You took over Tech Solutions. You have dozens of subsidiary companies. I need a job. I will do anything." I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, studying her pathetic posture. "You want me to employ you," I said, slowly letting the irony fill the silent office. "The woman who threw a drink at my catering staff. The woman who used my stolen money to buy designer bags while pretending to run an inner-city youth charity. You want a paycheck from my pocket. I am begging you." Chloe sobbed, actual tears spilling down her cheeks. "I was wrong. I was arrogant and stupid. David manipulated me. Do not blame David for your own racist entitlement." I interrupted, my voice sharp as a razor. You loved playing the wealthy benefactor. You loved looking down on black working-class professionals while secretly funding your lifestyle with their labor. But since you are so eager to work, I do have one opening. Chloe's eyes widened with desperate hope. Anything, Maya. I have a master's degree in communications. I can run your public relations department. I can manage your outreach programs. I let out a short, cynical laugh. You are in no position to manage anything, Chloe. I recently restructured Tech Solutions into an incubator hub for minority-owned startups. We have hundreds of brilliant young black entrepreneurs coming through those doors every single day. They work long hours and they require excellent hospitality. Chloe blinked, confusion crossing her face. Hospitality. I slid a standard employment contract across the desk. You will be the front desk receptionist and the primary break room attendant. Your duties will include brewing coffee, emptying the trash bins, scheduling meeting rooms, and smiling politely at every single person who walks through those doors. You will earn minimum wage. There are no benefits, no stock options, and absolutely no executive privileges. If you are late a single time, or if I receive even one complaint about your attitude, you will be terminated immediately, and I will personally send a copy of your termination notice to the bankruptcy judge. Chloe stared at the contract, her mouth opening and closing. You want me to serve coffee? Me. You said you would do anything, I reminded her coldly. This is honest hard work, something you have never experienced in your entire privileged life. Sign the contract, Chloe, or walk out of my building and wait for the federal marshals to arrest you. Her hands shook violently as she picked up the pen. The illusion of her superiority was completely crushed. She signed the paper, her tears staining the signature line. By the following Monday, Chloe was standing behind the reception desk at the startup incubator. She wore a standard issue polo shirt with the company logo. Her first customer of the day was Chef Thomas, the very man she had tried to get fired at the gala. He walked up to the desk, sliding his empty mug across the counter. I need a dark roast black, Chef Thomas said, looking directly into Chloe's eyes with a knowing, satisfied smirk. And please make sure the counter is wiped down this time. Chloe swallowed hard, her face burning with profound humiliation. Yes, sir, she mumbled, lowering her head and grabbing a fresh rag. Right away. She spent her days bowing her head, brewing coffee, and cleaning up after the brilliant, ambitious professionals she used to despise. Her white savior facade was stripped bare. She was no longer the elite benefactor. She was just the hired help surviving on the grace of the people she once tried to destroy. Time passed. Marcus' trial officially began. The federal court was absolutely packed. The heavy doors of the federal courthouse swung open, revealing a packed gallery eager to witness the destruction of a fallen titan. Marcus sat at the defense table, a pathetic contrast to the arrogant CEO who strutted down the red carpet months ago. Beside him sat his defense attorney, Harrison. Harrison launched into a calculated character assassination. Pacing the floor, he gestured aggressively toward where I sat. He painted a picture of a ruthless wife who orchestrated her husband's downfall. He claimed I was a power-hungry woman who used my venture capital resources to entrap Marcus in an impossible financial web. According to Harrison, Marcus was an overwhelmed visionary trying to build a black-owned tech empire, while I was a predatory vulture who manipulated the debt market out of jealousy. He accused me of freezing corporate accounts to manufacture a crisis, forcing Marcus to take desperate measures to save his employees. It was a fabricated story designed to place the blame entirely on my shoulders. Marcus sat there playing the part perfectly, keeping his head bowed, occasionally wiping a fake tear to garner sympathy from the jury. When the prosecutor called me to the witness stand, a heavy hush fell over the courtroom. I stood up, smoothing my navy blue suit. I walked to the stand with the calm grace of a woman who held every winning card. I swore to tell the truth and took my seat. Harrison approached the stand for his cross-examination, his voice dripping with condescension. Mrs. Miller, he began, resting his hands on the wooden railing. Is it not true that you intentionally purchased your husband's corporate debt through a hidden shell company with the specific intent of calling in the loan and seizing his assets to destroy him? I leaned into the microphone. I purchased the debt because Tech Solutions was exactly 90 days away from insolvency. I answered, my voice steady. My firm invests in distressed assets. What I did not anticipate was discovering that the chief executive officer was actively hemorrhaging that capital to fund a secret lifestyle completely unrelated to the tech industry. Harrison scoffed loudly. A wild accusation, Your Honor. Mrs. Miller is simply trying to deflect from her own hostile takeover. I reached into the leather portfolio resting on my lap and pulled out a stack of certified bank records. I do not make wild accusations, Mr. Harrison, I said smoothly. I do forensic accounting. I held up the first document, directing my gaze to the jury box. On screen 4 of the evidence monitor, you will see a direct wire transfer of $200,000 originating from the Tech Solutions payroll account. That money went to a luxury real estate holding company to prepay a 12-month lease on a midtown penthouse for a 22-year-old fitness model. Beside that is a receipt for a $50,000 diamond bracelet from Cartier, purchased the exact same day Marcus claimed he could not afford to pay his contractors. Harrison opened his mouth to object, but the judge raised a stern hand. The jury was leaning forward, captivated by the undeniable paper trail flashing across the screens. I pulled the next document from my folder. Furthermore, when Marcus exhausted the corporate accounts to fund his infidelity, he needed fresh capital to hide his embezzlement. He did not seek traditional investors because they would require a rigorous audit. Instead, he went to a predatory commercial lender. To secure a loan, he offered a property he did not legally own. I turned my head and looked directly at Marcus. He had stopped his performative crying. He was staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. The prosecution has submitted Exhibit C. I continued, my voice ringing with absolute authority. It is a commercial mortgage agreement, leveraging the Miller Heritage Home, a property belonging entirely to his mother, Brenda Miller. To execute this loan, Marcus forged his own mother's signature. He stole her generational wealth, gambled it on his failing startup, and lost her ancestral home to foreclosure. We have submitted sworn testimony from 2 independent handwriting experts confirming the signature is a complete forgery. He committed identity theft against the woman who gave him life. The courtroom erupted into shocked whispers. The older Black community leaders sitting in the gallery gasped aloud. The sheer depravity of stealing a historical family home to fund a mistress shattered any lingering sympathy the jury might have held for the disgraced CEO. Harrison stood frozen. He looked down at his notes, then back at the forensic evidence displayed on the monitors. His entire defense strategy collapsed into dust within a matter of minutes. He had absolutely no counter-argument for a forged signature and clearly documented wire fraud. Completely defeated, Harrison walked back to the defense table and sank into his chair. The crushing reality of his situation hit Marcus. The walls of the federal courtroom were closing in tight. He looked at the jury, reading the absolute disgust written plainly on their faces. He looked at the judge, whose expression was carved from unyielding stone. He was going to federal prison for a long time. Panic seized his brain. If he was going down, he refused to go down alone. Marcus suddenly shot up from his chair, ignoring his lawyer's frantic attempts to pull him back down. It was not just me. Marcus screamed, his voice cracking wildly as he pointed a violently shaking finger toward the back of the courtroom. I did not act alone. David took the money too. My brother embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars from the company accounts. He funneled it to his wife, Chloe. They used the corporate funds to pay for their Aspen vacations and her designer clothes. She even used her inner-city youth charity to launder the stolen cash. I have the bank routing numbers. I will give you everything. Just give me a plea deal. I will testify against my own older brother. David vaulted over the wooden partitions separating the gallery from the defense tables. His face was twisted in a mask of absolute feral rage. You treacherous coward, David roared, lunging directly toward Marcus. You forced me to take that money. You said the company was bleeding cash, and you needed me to hide assets before the Internal Revenue Service noticed. Do not you dare put this on my wife. Chloe shrieked from the second row, her voice piercing the heavy oak-paneled room. She pointed a violently shaking finger at both brothers. You are both pathetic, broke liars. She screamed, completely abandoning any remaining shred of her refined, progressive persona. I knew nothing about where that money came from. My charity is legitimate. You hijacked my foundation to save your own miserable skin, Marcus. I will happily testify against both of you. I will bury this entire family. Brenda threw herself between her two adult sons as the federal bailiffs rushed down the center aisle. She slapped David hard on the shoulder, then turned and clawed at Marcus's ruined suit jacket. How could you do this to your own flesh and blood? Brenda wailed, her voice cracking under the weight of her shattered social empire. You are destroying our legacy. You stole my house and now you are sending your own brother to a federal penitentiary. You are no son of mine. Marcus shoved his mother away, completely discarding the matriarch he had spent his entire life trying to impress. You never cared about me, Mom. He spat, his eyes wild with cornered desperation. You only cared about the country club memberships and the designer clothes I bought you. You happily spent the money I stole from Maya. You all did. You are all parasites and I am not taking the fall for any of you. Order in my courtroom. Order right now. The heavy wooden gavel slammed against the sounding block like a gunshot. Judge Reynolds stood up behind the elevated bench, her face radiating absolute furious authority. 4 armed federal marshals immediately swarmed the defense area, violently pulling David and Marcus apart. They forced David back into the gallery and shoved Marcus hard into his wooden chair. Sit down and shut your mouths, the judge commanded, her voice echoing off the high vaulted ceilings. Anyone who speaks another word will be held in criminal contempt and jailed for the night. Do I make myself perfectly clear? The sheer force of her authority instantly silenced the chaotic screaming match. Brenda collapsed into a gallery bench, weeping openly into her hands. Chloe crossed her arms tightly, glaring at the floor, while David stood breathing heavily under the watchful eye of a marshal. I have presided over federal fraud cases for more than 2 decades. Judge Reynolds stated, her eyes sweeping over the disgraced family with profound, chilling disgust. I have seen corporate espionage. I have seen organized crime rings, and I have seen high-level political corruption. But I have rarely witnessed a display of moral bankruptcy quite as sickening as the one taking place in my courtroom today. She looked directly at Brenda, David, and Chloe in the gallery. You people represent the absolute worst of opportunistic greed. You turned upon each other like starved animals the second your stolen privileges were threatened. There is no loyalty here. There is no family here. There is only a collection of selfish individuals entirely willing to destroy one another to save themselves. The district attorney has taken careful note of the criminal admissions shouted in this room today. I assure you investigations will be swift. Judge Reynolds then turned her piercing gaze downward, locking eyes with Marcus. He sat slumped at the defense table, trembling violently, stripped of every single defense mechanism he had ever possessed. Marcus Miller, the judge continued, her tone dropping to a lethal frozen register. You orchestrated a highly sophisticated scheme to defraud investors who trusted you to uplift your own community. You financially exploited your own wife. You committed severe identity theft against your own mother to steal her generational home. And when the walls closed in on your pathetic operation, your immediate instinct was to offer up your own brother to save your skin. You are a predator who operates under the guise of an innovator. Marcus opened his mouth to beg, but his own lawyer forcefully clamped a hand over his arm, silently warning him not to speak. This court does not reward cowardice, and it certainly does not negotiate with thieves, Judge Reynolds declared. Based on the overwhelming forensic evidence provided by the prosecution and your complete lack of remorse until you were caught, I am rejecting any possibility of a plea deal. She picked up her pen, looking down at the official sentencing documents. For the charges of first-degree grand larceny, aggravated wire fraud, and felony identity theft, I sentence you to 15 years in a federal penitentiary. These sentences will be served consecutively. Due to the malicious nature of your financial crimes, you will not be eligible for early parole. The heavy wooden gavel struck the block one final time, sealing his absolute destruction. Court is adjourned. The harsh metallic click of cold steel handcuffs echoed sharply through the silent courtroom. 2 federal marshals gripped Marcus by the arms, hauling him up from his chair. His legs buckled, forcing the marshals to physically drag his dead weight toward the side exit, leading directly to the holding cells. As they pulled him away, Marcus wrenched his neck around. He looked back at me one last time. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and filled with a bottomless, suffocating despair. He was silently begging for the very mercy he had relentlessly denied me for years. I stood calmly from the witness stand. I did not flinch. I did not offer him a single ounce of sympathy. I simply gave him a slow, satisfied smile. I turned my back on his pathetic, sobbing form, smoothing my tailored navy blue suit. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom and stepped out into the brilliant, blinding sunlight, walking steadily toward the vibrant green park across the street, where my beautiful son Leo was standing safely waiting for his mother. 6 months dissolved the bitter ashes of the past into the fertile soil of my new empire. The transition was absolute and ruthless. I completely gutted the hollow shell of tech solutions, systematically stripping away every single fraudulent vanity project Marcus had used to bleed our community dry. I fired his complicit executive board and liquidated the useless assets. In its place, I built the Apex Innovation Hub. We were no longer a fake software firm acting as a personal slush fund for a lying narcissist. We became a massive, highly capitalized incubator dedicated entirely to funding, mentoring, and launching African American startups across the southern United States. Where Marcus had stolen from local grants and church funds, I injected millions of my own venture capital to buy back our community's trust. I personally ensured that Reverend Thomas received a full restitution check for his congregation, complete with a substantial dividend. The results were instantaneous and explosive. We launched 30 new Black-owned businesses in the first quarter alone, transforming the financial landscape of Atlanta. To celebrate the end of a record-breaking financial quarter, I hosted a cookout. But this was absolutely nothing like the toxic, suffocating barbecue Brenda had orchestrated at her heavily mortgaged fake legacy estate. This was a genuine celebration of Black excellence held on the sprawling, immaculate lawns of the new $12 million mega mansion I had purchased outright in cash. My home sat on 10 acres of pristine gated woodland, a fortress of peace and prosperity. Classic rhythm and blues pulsed beautifully from high-end outdoor speakers, blending perfectly with the rich, loud, unapologetic laughter of my guests. There were no fake smiles here today. There were no white savior sisters-in-law complaining about the seasoning or the volume of the music. There were no manipulative mothers-in-law judging my worth based on my zip code. Chef Thomas, the very man who had stood like a brick wall to block Marcus from escaping the federal raid, was manning a massive custom outdoor grill. I had fully funded his culinary startup 3 months ago, and today he was catering my party as a highly successful restaurant owner. The warm summer air was thick with the mouth-watering scent of slow-smoked brisket, perfectly charred ribeyes, and his signature honey-glazed chicken. The people surrounding me on the patio were the brilliant young entrepreneurs I had funded, the fiercely loyal staff who ran my daily operations, and the genuine friends who had stood by my side when my ex-husband tried to bury me in family court. They were my true family, bound by mutual respect and shared success. I stood on the expansive limestone patio, holding a delicate crystal glass of full-bodied red wine. The Georgia sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden hour glow over the entire property. Down on the manicured grass, little Leo was sprinting happily toward a massive custom bounce house, shrieking with pure, unadulterated joy. He was completely free from the aggressive, volatile shadow of his father. He was surrounded by people who adored him, playing tag with the children of my executive board members. He did not have to worry about a raging narcissist snatching his plate of macaroni and cheese to make a point about submission. He was safe, he was loved, and he was thriving. I took a slow sip of my red wine, watching my son run across the lawn. The tailored emerald green silk jumpsuit I wore draped flawlessly over my frame, a quiet, striking testament to the absolute power I now wielded in this city. I had torn down a house of devastating lies and built an impenetrable, wealthy fortress in its place. I was not just a survivor of a horrific marriage and a toxic, manipulative family. I was the undisputed queen of my own reality. I had taken every stone they threw at me and used it to pave the road to my ultimate victory. My moment of perfect tranquility was interrupted by the heavy, deliberate crunch of expensive leather shoes against the limestone patio. I did not need to turn around to know who had just breached my private sanctuary. Preston Thorne was a notorious old money tech billionaire who controlled a massive rival venture capital syndicate. He was the kind of man who believed that power belonged exclusively to people who looked exactly like him. I had spent the last 2 months desperately trying to buy me out, furiously attempting to absorb the Apex Innovation Hub before we completely dominated the entire southern financial market. I had rejected every single one of his predatory acquisition offers. He stepped up beside me, holding a short glass of neat bourbon. His pale blue eyes scanned my vibrant, joyful cookout with thinly veiled, arrogant disdain. He adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke navy suit, leaning slightly closer to me, to ensure our conversation remained strictly between us. "This is a truly beautiful property," Maya Preston said, his voice smooth, but laced with a distinctly predatory, dangerous edge. "It is quite a step up for you. You have done an admirable job playing the visionary leader for these small local startups. But you should really enjoy this little celebration while it lasts. You see, I do not take rejection well. I officially acquired 3 of your major supply chain vendors this morning. I bought them out from right under you. When the new quarter starts next week, I am going to completely choke your supply lines. I am going to freeze your distribution channels, block your tech manufacturing, and bleed your little charity incubator dry until you have absolutely no choice but to beg me to buy your equity for pennies on the dollar. You are completely out of your league. I will personally ensure that your entire operation collapses into dust before the end of the year. Consider this your final, polite warning to surrender to me peacefully." Preston Thorne stood there, the ice clinking softly in his crystal bourbon glass. His smirk was a meticulously crafted weapon, one he had undoubtedly used for decades in mahogany boardrooms and exclusive country clubs, to silence anyone who dared challenge his authority. He leaned his imposing frame closer, casting a literal shadow over me, fully expecting my posture to crumble under the sheer weight of his patriarchal old money intimidation. He thought he was dealing with a frightened, single black woman who had merely gotten lucky. He thought the hostile business maneuvers he just outlined would send me running back into the margins of the financial world, begging for a fraction of what I rightfully owned. He believed his pale skin, his bespoke suit, and his inherited billions granted him the divine right to dictate the boundaries of my success. I did not step back. I did not avert my gaze or nervously clutch my wine glass. I let the warm Georgia evening breeze rustle the silk of my emerald green jumpsuit, maintaining absolute terrifying stillness. I looked into his pale blue eyes and saw exactly what he was. He was a dinosaur clinging to an obsolete era, terrified of the vibrant, unstoppable future expanding right in front of him on my lawn. I took a slow, measured sip of my Cabernet. The rich, bold flavor mirrored the absolute certainty burning in my chest. For years, I had allowed a mediocre man to tell me my worth. I had allowed his toxic family to dictate my position. I was never going to allow another man, no matter how vast his bank accounts were, to attempt that same psychological violence. "I bought 3 supply chain vendors this morning," I stated, keeping my voice pitched at a conversational, almost bored level. "That is an aggressive move, Preston. It is also entirely irrelevant. What your overpriced acquisition team failed to realize is that I spent the last 3 months transitioning the Apex Innovation Hub to a completely independent closed-loop manufacturing network. The vendors you just overpaid for represent our old infrastructure. We terminated those contracts on Tuesday. You just spent $30 million acquiring empty warehouses and outdated machinery. You do not hold the keys to my distribution channels. You are holding the garbage bags I already threw out." The smug, arrogant smirk vanished from Preston's face as if it had been violently wiped away. His pale eyes widened, the glass of bourbon trembling ever so slightly in his manicured hand. He opened his mouth to formulate a rebuttal, to issue another empty corporate threat, but I did not give him the space to breathe. I slowly turned my body to face him entirely. My gaze sharpened into a lethal, unforgiving blade. I took a deliberate, dominant step forward. The sudden shift in power was so absolute, so physically overwhelming, that Preston instinctively took a clumsy, staggered step backward, his polished leather shoes slipping awkwardly against the smooth limestone patio. I closed the distance again, invading his personal space, forcing him to look down at the woman he thought he could effortlessly bully. I stripped my husband of every single financial asset he possessed. I said, my voice a deadly melodic whisper that cut straight to his core. I sent the man I married to a federal penitentiary without a second thought. I completely crushed my mother-in-law's tyrannical pride and stripped her of her ancestral home. I turned my elitist, arrogant sister-in-law into a minimum-wage coffee runner, serving the very black professionals she used to look down on. And I accomplished every single piece of that absolute destruction without smudging my lipstick. I tilted my head, letting a cold, merciless smile touch my lips. Do you honestly think your cheap, outdated business tricks are enough to make me blink? Preston Thorne stood completely paralyzed. The color rapidly drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and hollow under the soft string lights illuminating my patio. The towering, intimidating billionaire was reduced to a speechless, terrified old man who suddenly realized he had stepped into the wrong arena. He had expected an easy target. Instead, he had provoked a woman forged in the fires of ultimate betrayal and absolute resilience. He swallowed hard, his throat bobbing nervously. He looked at the fierce, untouchable expression on my face and understood with absolute clarity that I was not bluffing. If he crossed me, I would dismantle his legacy just as ruthlessly as I had dismantled my ex-husband's life. Without uttering a single word of his planned retaliation, he turned on his heel and walked away. His previously confident stride devolved into a hurried, humiliated retreat as he rushed toward the front gates, desperate to escape the property of the woman who had just mentally and professionally eviscerated him. I watched him scurry into the darkness, completely banished from my kingdom. The heavy iron front gates clicked shut behind him, sealing my fortress. I turned my back to the driveway and faced my gorgeous, vibrant party. The music swelled, a triumphant, soulful melody that resonated deep within my bones. Down on the manicured lawn, my son Leo threw his head back, laughing brightly, as Chef Thomas handed him a massive plate of smoked brisket. Surrounding them were the brilliant minds, the loyal friends, and the true family I had built from the ground up. I raised my crystal glass to the fading sunset, the deep red wine catching the last beautiful light of the day. I drank it down, savoring the taste of absolute, unadulterated victory. I smiled, a genuine, radiant expression of pure peace, and walked back down the steps to join my people. The darkness of the past faded away, entirely consumed by the brilliant, unstoppable light of the empire I had created. The profound lesson from Maya's journey is that your true worth is never defined by those who constantly belittle you. When faced with toxic family dynamics, relentless gaslighting, and financial exploitation, the ultimate revenge is not loud destruction, but silent strategic elevation. Maya proved that true power comes from building your own empire, setting unbreakable boundaries, and fiercely protecting your peace. You do not have to shrink yourself to fit into someone else's broken narrative. Reclaim your space and let your success speak for itself. Please share your own stories of overcoming toxic environments in the comments section right below.